The night pressed gently upon the palace, muffling the world in a velvet hush. Along the great hallway, the torchlight flickered in slow rhythms, casting golden halos on smooth limestone walls. Every flame seemed to whisper, not with heat, but with memory. Fragrance of myrrh, frankincense, and something older, unspoken clung to the air, mixing with the faint trace of sweat and silk. In these corridors, men once walked in silence, their hearts tangled, not with politics, but with secrets too delicate for the daylight. Each step echoed, soft and deliberate, as though the hallway itself were alive and listening. Carved into the stone were scenes of devotion and joy. If one looked closely, hidden between the sacred symbols were depictions that twisted the meaning of worship. A woman kneeling before a god did not plead for blessings, but something carnal, something whispered only in the harem quarters. Even the sacred had been sculpted with fingers trembling from desire. Under orders they dared not question. The corridors curved like a serpent, long and fluid, and led deeper into the body of the palace. There were no windows here, only lantern, niches, and incense altars. On some nights, the pharaoh's voice could be heard, low and melodic, reciting verses not found in temple scrolls, but in the private writings of those who studied desire. It was said that even Hathor turned her head in shame when these prayers were spoken. Yet no god ever struck him down, and so he spoke louder. Silken curtains hung in the alcoves, thick and perfumed, stitched with golden threads. Behind them, unseen hands played flutes or touched skin. Sometimes they wept. The pharaoh's guards, eunuchs, robed in white and smeared with sacred oil, stood statue-still by doorways, never blinking, never turning, though they had witnessed things that would wither a lesser soul. Their silence was not loyalty, it was survival. At the end of the hallway stood a great double door, carved from acacia and etched with symbols too old for even the priests to name. The doorway led to a chamber none dared speak of by name. The walls inside were rumored to be painted with scenes not of war or harvest, but of coupling, obsession, and acts only whispered between dancers and healers. The air here was said to throb, to pulse with something not seen but felt, something fevered and hungry. The floor was inlaid with polished lapis lazuli and obsidian, arranged in a spiral pattern that drew the eye to the center, where a couch of cedar and gold stood like a throne, surrounded by cushions, ivory instruments, and bowls of strange unguents. On that couch, pharaohs had lain not in sleep, but in ritual. Bodies came to them there not as subjects, but as offerings. Their names were never remembered, their stories never carved, only the king's hunger remained immortal. From behind a curtain, a woman once emerged each night, naked but for a chain of pearls. She was said to have never spoken a word, but her movements were a language older than script. Her gaze did not seek permission, it commanded. Those who watched her said even the marble beneath her feet warmed as she passed. Some believed she was a ghost, others a curse. But she returned each night, summoned not by desire, but by the pharaoh's fear of dreaming alone. The guards changed each season, but none ever lasted long. Their faces became drawn, their eyes dulled, as though they aged faster within those halls. Some were found kneeling at the altar of the goddess Mut, begging for forgetfulness. Others vanished entirely, their names scratched from records, as though the hallway itself had swallowed them in mercy. It was said that the walls could remember touch that fingers sliding over the sandstone left imprints of longing and shame. In quiet hours, when the palace slept, some scribes claimed to hear moans echo faintly through the stone. Not screams, never screams. These were softer, like the breath of someone no longer alive, but not yet gone. A slave girl once wandered too far into the corridor, lost on her way to deliver fruit. She returned, pale, her bowl empty, and refused to speak again. Her hair turned white within a week, and she was sent to a convent beyond the river, where nuns of Nephthys cared for the broken. To this day, her name is sung in lullabies by mothers who fear their daughters may stray. On feast nights, the perfumed hallway would glow with candles arranged in sacred patterns. The smell of wine, roses, and sandalwood would blend with the sound of flutes. Men and women of the court, adorned in feathered collars and oiled skin, were summoned one by one. They never left through the same door. Their eyes shifted like prey, afterward, and none dared speak of what they had given to the crown. Among the palace staff, a scribe named Coretti began to document the changes. He wrote of shadows that lingered even when the torchlight moved. He penned entries about laughter that came from behind closed walls. though none stood there. His records grew darker, more poetic, filled with imagery that unnerved the priests. His last journal entry ended mid-sentence, his pen still full of ink. Yet he was never seen again. A painter who was once commissioned to refurbish the murals fainted before finishing his work. His companions found him whispering a single word over and over, unseen. He later told a healer that he had tried to restore the scenes, but each night the paint rearranged itself. The figures twisted into new poses, their eyes watching him from the stone. Not even the royal cats lingered long in that hallway, known for choosing only sacred places to rest. The palace cats would hiss when nearing its entrance and slink away with arched backs. When one was found dead upon the threshold, stiff with fear, the priests took it as a sign to close off a section of the passage, but no wall could truly divide the living from what haunted that stone. It was believed that those who indulged in that hall never aged in their reflection. Mirrors placed their returned faces unmarked by time, but once removed, their true image appeared, sagging, hollowed, decaying. Some courtiers refused to look into any mirror again, choosing to walk the palace with eyes downcast and heads veiled. The hallway was eventually sealed after the last Kiffarau fell ill with an unknown fever. No physician could identify the cause. His skin blistered as if kissed by invisible fire, and he died muttering the names of long-forgotten dancers. His tomb was built far from the valley, where even the jackals would not walk. His chamber was filled not with treasures but with empty urns, an echo of pleasures that could no longer be satisfied. But stones remember, and desire does not die. On certain nights, when the moon is a sharp crescent and the Nile sighs like a widow, some claim to see faint candlelight beneath the palace ruins. A scent follows familiar and foreign-like, the sweat of longing, the smoke of regret. No one ventures near, for fear the hallway might awaken and breathe once more. It is not always lust that destroys a kingdom. Sometimes it is longing, stretched too far, like a bowstring waiting to snap. The Kiffareos were not evil, merely unsated. Their thirst was a kind that wine could not drown, nor prayers silence. In their hunger, they carved a path through the palace that outlived their bones. Now, all that remains is the stone. But if one listens closely, with the ears of the heart and the patience of sand, the hallway speaks. It does not cry, nor wail. It murmurs, a slow, breathless murmur of names, of acts, of desire that was once holy, then hidden, then cursed, and it never ends. The perfume still clings, though no hand has burned incense for centuries. It hangs in the air beneath the collapsed arches, in the dust resting gently on once smooth floors. Time has faded the murals, but not the memory. The hallway sleeps, yes, but it does not forget. In the hush of antiquity, the word perversion had no place. What we label now as deviance, those ancient ones may have called divine exploration. Their world was not divided cleanly into sin and virtue, but was instead a winding river of ceremony, myth, flesh, and magic. To the Egyptians, the body was not shameful, nor was its pleasure. The cosmos itself, they believed, had been born from ecstatic eruption creation through union, both tender and fierce, between gods who loved and warred in equal measure. Even the sun's daily rise was tied to sexual symbolism. Ra's voyage across the sky was not only light-bringing but life-bestowing. His radiant emergence, likened to masculine arousal. His descent into the underworld, a form of cosmic release and regeneration. The ancients did not avert their eyes from such imagery. They carved it into temple walls, whispered it into hymns, and wove it through funerary texts. They did not view desire as something to be tamed, but as a divine current to be honored, managed, and occasionally feared. In their pantheon, no god represented cold chastity. Hathor, the Lady of Joy, wore necklaces of turquoise and danced in celebration of the body's song. She governed love, music, intoxication, and pleasure. Her temples were places of laughter, wine, and intimate revelry. Her priestesses, adorned in delicate linen and sweet perfumes, were not mere servants of a deity, they embodied her. Those who entered her sacred spaces did not kneel to atone. They came to feel, to give, and to merge. But even joy has a shadow. The ancient Egyptians believed that every force, no matter how divine, had a chaotic mirror. Just as order was personified in Mat, so was chaos in Isfit. Arousal too had its darker twin. Where sacred union bloomed, obsession sometimes festered. Where affection once reigned, compulsion might root itself. And though they had no word for perversion as we do, they feared what happened when the boundaries of ritual and desire blurred. Beyond recognition, the priests were the first to observe such transformations. They noticed when certain nobles returned too frequently to the temple of Hathor, not in devotion, but in need. They watched as offerings grew stranger milk mixed with blood, amulets carved with obscene images, scrolls asking for domination rather than balance. The temples did not forbid these acts outright. Instead, they observed, documented, and prayed that the gods, in their wisdom, might realign the soul of the supplicant. Scribes recorded these observations in private books, bound not in gold, but in silence. These scrolls were hidden behind thick walls, entrusted to generations of archivists who understood that knowledge was both power and burden. Some of these writings spoke of men and women who claimed to have dreams sent by Sekhmet, urging them toward acts of domination. Others wrote of visions in which the gods demanded erotic sacrifices in exchange for wealth, health, or revenge. Yet it wasn't only mortals who dabbled in these edges. The myths themselves were laced with transgression. Set, the god of chaos, was said to have assaulted Horus in an attempt to dominate him not out of desire, but to assert power through humiliation. That tale was not hidden, it was studied. It was used to explain the dynamics of conflict and shame, of revenge and divine justice. The ancients knew that even the heavens were not immune to passion's darker expressions. The idea of purity, as we conceive it today, was absent. Virginity was not sacred, it was a state, not a virtue. Instead, what mattered was balance. Was a person's desire in harmony with the world? Did their pleasure reflect divine rhythm, or did it disrupt it? This was the line the ancient Egyptians watched closely. The danger was not in the act itself, but in its intent, in its outcome, in whether it served Maat or threatened it. In royal courts, this ambiguity deepened. Pharaohs were divine and human both, subject to different rules than mortals. Their indulgences were often framed as rights. Their lovers became vessels. Their desires, even the strangest ones, were cloaked in sacred purpose. And yet, not all within the court believed. Some whispered, some feared. A pharaoh who took too much, asked too often, or blurred the sacred too frequently, became dangerous not just to his people, but to the spiritual order of the land. The high priests of Ammon once debated behind closed doors whether to intervene in a royal ceremony where the line between worship and cruelty had been crossed. A girl had been brought, adorned in leopard skin and gold dust, to act as Bastet incarnate, but the rites extended past dawn. Her cries were not of ecstasy. The priests burned incense and prayed louder, unsure whether they were blessing or masking her agony. None spoke of it again, but her statue was never installed. Among the common people, perversion was feared, not because it was rare, but because it could go unnoticed. A merchant might offer a sacred loaf to Osiris in public, but whisper devotions to darker gods in private. A farmer might carve obscene figures into his tools, believing it would bless his soil with fertility. Children were taught not only to fear crocodiles and snakes, but to stay away from certain ruins places where the stones still held the heat of ancient desires gone wrong. Festivals, too, were both joyful and dangerous. During the Feast of Drunkenness, men and women danced wildly, drank until they collapsed, and engaged in acts they claimed were divinely inspired. Priests watched carefully, guiding the intoxicated into sacred chambers where they could merge with the divine. But not all returned unchanged. Some awoke with bruises and no memory. Some never awoke at all. The priests said it was the God's will. The people whispered otherwise. Artistic depictions from the New Kingdom show couples in embrace, lovers entwined, bodies open to view. These were not hidden, they were displayed. But beside them, in hidden rooms or the backs of tombs, are stranger images, hybrid creatures, impossible positions, symbols of restraint. These were not meant for everyone's eyes. They were coded for the initiated, the curious, the perverse, and even then, only certain priests could interpret them without losing their place in the order. In Alexandria, centuries later, when foreign scholars uncovered some of these images, they misunderstood them as pornography. They failed to grasp the layers of symbolism, how certain acts were not about lust but power, not about pleasure but the afterlife. They misread sacred coupling as crude desire, and in doing so, lost the meaning hidden in every curve of ink and pigment. One particular temple outside Thebes was rumored to have a secret chamber known as the Vault of Offerings. Inside, behind stone doors opened only during lunar eclipses, lay a collection of relic dolls, rings, blindfolds, oil jars shaped like animals. These were not toys but tools. Each was inscribed with prayers, designed to channel a specific energy. Only those who had completed 30 years of celibacy were allowed to touch them. They alone were considered pure enough to carry impurity without absorbing it. Stories also speak of the Temple of Dendora, where beneath the chambers of Hath lay a lower sanctum, a labyrinth of painted corridors that depicted the stages of physical temptation. Initiates walked through them blindfolded, guided only by flute music and incense. At the end, they were asked to choose between two doors. One led to communion, the other to exile. It was not a test of morality, but of balance whether one could face pleasure without becoming consumed by it. Not all perversion was punished. Sometimes it was recorded in poetry. Lovers wrote verses that described not the kiss, but the aftermath, the trembling, the shame, the ache of yearning. These poems were placed beneath pillows, burned in lamps, or buried under statues. The act of writing them was itself a kind of exorcism. Desire, when confined to words, was safer than when left to grow unchecked in the flesh. In villages, midwives carried charms to prevent obsession. They believed that some children were born already hungry not for milk, but for touch, for control. These babies were swaddled in black cloth, kept away from mirrors, and offered prayers each night. It was said if one failed to do this, the child would grow to command bodies with a glance and destroy marriages with a whisper. Even among the dead, the fear remained. Tomb inscriptions sometimes begged the gods to cleanse the soul of twisting hunger, of the desire that bends mat. Some mummies were buried with sealed jars, not of organs, but of items too, shamed to be named. These were meant to trap the perversions the dead carried with them, so they would not follow the soul into the field of reeds. Modern minds may scoff at such fears, but the ancients knew what we forget, that desire is not always kind, not always sacred. That pleasure, unchecked, becomes hunger. That hunger, unbalanced, becomes a shadow that walks beside a man, feeding from his eyes, his mouth, his hands, until even love begins to rot. They feared not the act, but the forgetting of the self within it, the disappearance of Mat in the mirror, and so they wrote, carved, chanted, and warned quietly, in corridors far from sunlight, hoping that the balance might hold, if only a little longer. Ask ChatGPT. There are words not born of ink, but of fear, words that slip between lips in torchlight, carried on breath but never carved in stone. Kifero was one such term. It did not appear in temple records, nor was it spoken in the courts. Instead, it floated like dust along the palace corridors, uttered only by the trembling tongues of scribes, dancers, and eunuchs who had seen too much and spoken too little. To call a ruler a Kifero was not to insult him outright, but to mark him an unspoken understanding of a hunger far beyond indulgence. It is said the word was born not in the royal tongue, but in the hushes between two servant girls, preparing linens for the king's private chamber. One had witnessed bruises beneath a priestess's veil. The other found petals smeared with what looked like blood on the floor near the sacred pool. Neither dared ask questions, but in their silence bloomed a need for a name, something to give shape to the wrongness they felt. And so Kifera was born, whispered first between women, then men, then slowly into legend. Kifera is not a name one writes. It is a name one inherits like a stain. It does not refer to any one king, but to a type of spirit trapped in flesh that seeks pleasure not for union or joy, but to dominate, consume, and unravel. The prefix Ki was drawn from an older root, once used to describe cracked vessels or spoiled water, something tainted from within, and when attached to Pharaoh, it became a quiet rebellion, a warning, a curse masked as a title. The earliest known tale involving a Kifirao dates back to the First Intermediate Period. A fragmented tablet, discovered near Abydos, speaks of a ruler who bathed not in milk or perfume, but in the tears of those chosen from the temple of Bast. It is written that his favorite scent was sorrow, and he demanded it be collected fresh each morning. No name is given, but the final line reads, "The sun turned away its face, and the river mourned his touch." Servants who worked in the inner sanctums of royal chambers spoke of kings whose desires shifted with the wind, who were tired of touch and sought instead domination. One account written in code by a eunuch named Nechtari, described a ruler who kept his concubines blindfolded, not for their pleasure, but to erase their will. They did not dance, they obeyed. They did not sing, they endured. And when they could no longer do either, they vanished into the silent parts of the palace, never to be seen again. Yet the word Khifrau was never spoken by the noble class. To them, their ruler was divine, his actions justified by lineage, and God-blood. Even when rumors spread of ceremonies involving masks, chains, and blood-painted walls, the priests called it sacred, misunderstood by those too low to grasp its meaning. But behind closed doors, even they flinched when summoned past twilight. Even they whispered prayers before entering the scented halls, where silence was enforced, not by awe, but by terror. One of the most chilling tales came from a gardener named Tet, whose sole duty was to tend the lilies outside the pharaoh's harem. He once claimed to have seen a girl no more than 13 led into the chamber draped in gold but barefoot. Her eyes were hollow. She held no offerings, only silence. When Tet returned the next day, the lilies were withered, and the girl's anklet was found buried in the soil. He resigned the next morning, taking a vow of silence that he kept until death. Khifrau became a term wrapped in fear. Mothers would whisper it to daughters as a warning: never meet the eyes of men who wear too much gold. Dancers would pray to Hathor that their king was a lover of rhythm, not control. Scribes learned to omit certain scenes when recording royal feasts. Stay tales of strange rituals, of guests who left with torn garments and empty eyes, were simply left out. Their scrolls became works of fiction crafted to protect truth too terrible to write. In some temples, priests began to notice patterns. Statues of the gods wept oil, and incense would not stay lit. Offerings spoiled before sunrise. These were taken as signs, not of divine anger, but of imbalance. They called for fasting, ritual cleansing, and purging of unknown evil. But they never pointed their fingers upward. To accuse a pharaoh was to invite death. So they washed the altars, purified the air, and hoped the king's appetite would turn elsewhere. There were whispers that certain Khifraos used the guise of divine union to justify their acts. They claimed possession by deities, by Min, god of fertility, or Base, guardian of the bedroom. In ecstasy, they said, their hands were no longer their own, but those who suffered under them did not feel blessed. They felt broken. These kings would demand sacred dances last through the night, until the skin peeled from the drums and the dancers collapsed, trembling not from trance but exhaustion. The most infamous Khifrau of all was never named aloud. His name was scrubbed from obelisks and scratched out from steely. Only the image of his eyes remains, carved above a sealed chamber door beneath the sands of Saqqara, eyes wide, unblinking, without lids, forever watching. It is said that his palace was constructed underground, and his guests never saw the sun again. Their laughter was forced, their pleasure commanded, and when they died, their names were burned. The word spread slowly, like a bruise blooming beneath the skin of the kingdom. Those closest to power knew to never say it, but they recognized its signs. Gifts to the palace changed from silk and gold to charms and protective amulets. Dancers wore red stones on their wrists to ward off obsession. Priests began to sleep, in groups, never alone. Even the cats kept their distance, their fur bristling when passed near the sacred doors. No rebellion ever rose against a Khifrau openly, but a different kind of resistance grew. Artists painted murals with hidden symbols, snakes coiled around lotus flowers, eyes drawn upside down, ankhs placed backward. These were subtle defacements, reminders that not all worshipped in fear. Some remembered the old balance, the sacred laws that once ruled over passion and pain, and they etched their protests in shadow. Over time, the term Khifrau took on a life of its own. It no longer referred solely to kings, but to any wielder of power who crossed the line between ritual and violation. High priests, generals, noblemen, any who took too much, demanded too far, were cursed with the name. In markets and bathhouses, people would touch their throat and nod silently when one such man passed, as if to say, "There goes another who wears the title." None dare speak. The libraries of Alexandria later found scraps of papyrian written in trembling hand describing pharaohs who kept secret scrolls filled with techniques, not of healing or governance, but of domination. These were not teachings passed to heirs, they were obsessions, collected like insects in jars. Their contents included drawings of positions meant to humiliate, recipes for narcotic perfumes, and rituals that bound the will of another. Scholars dismissed them as fiction, but some pages still smelled faintly of jasmine. As centuries passed and kingdoms fell, the memory of the Kyphareos did not die. Instead, they faded into myth. They became the subject of ghost stories, of midnight chants by temple acolytes testing their courage. Some believed the souls of Kyphareos wandered the dunes, seeking bodies to possess. Others said they lay beneath the Nile's current, pulling at ankles in dreams, dragging desire into drowning. Among the Bedouin, who settled near ruins, legends spoke of a desert wind that drove men mad with lust and made women dream of fire. They said it came from the tomb of a forgotten king whose heart had turned to stone and whose touch lingered in the sand. When that wind blew, they sealed their tents and whispered old prayers not to the gods, but to the unnamed victims who might still listen. In modern times, the word survives only in fragments. A child's rhyme in a Luxor village warns of the king who kissed too hard. An old midwife in Cairo still keeps a black bead in her pocket, saying it protects against royal hunger. These remnants are thin, almost lost, but they are enough to remind us that history is not just what is written, but what is whispered, feared, and endured. The Kyphareos were not monsters in form. They were adored, robed in beauty and power. Their cruelty did not rot smiled. Their temples echoed, with music, not screams. And yet, those who walked in their shadow aged quickly, slept poorly, and prayed quietly. The silence they demanded was not peace, it was terror dressed as gold. To call someone a Kyphareo now is to invoke a specter of authority, corrupted by craving. It is not a historical claim, but a spiritual warning. And in the wind-swept ruins of halls where incense once burned and dancers once wept, the name still lingers not in stone, but in the air, waiting to be heard again. In the hush of Egyptian night, when the wind curled through reeds and the Nile shimmered like spilled ink, whispers of love magic drifted through hidden courtyards and shadowed doorways. The ancients did not see enchantment and desire as separate. To them, every heartbeat could be shaped, every glance turned sacred or cursed with a few well-chosen words and sacred gestures. The line between affection and domination was delicate, and the scribes of forbidden arts knew just how to make the heart obey. Among the papyrus reeds, women would collect dew at first light, believing it held the breath of Hathor. They mixed it with crushed rose petals, oil from the blue lotus, and ash from temple incense. This potion, when painted along the collarbone, was said to draw the eyes of a desired lover without fail. Even the sun priestesses would not deny its power, though they insisted it only worked when combined with prayer and intention pure of heart. But not all hearts were pure. Many who practiced the erotic arts sought not union but control. Love spells could bind the soul, twist longing into sickness, or draw a person from across the desert as if by rope. Scribes in Memphis recorded instances of men crying in their sleep, plagued by visions of women they had never touched, their bodies fevered with need. These were not dreams, but curses, drawn by wax dolls and spoken names buried beneath doorways. Wax figures were one of the most potent tools in love magic. They were carved with care, shaped to mimic the target, marked with their name and sometimes a lock of hair or a scrap of linen touched to their skin. The magician, often a priest in secret rebellion or a woman trained in the house of life, would anoint the doll with oil and speak words of fire and submission. The doll would be placed under the mattress or buried near the threshold of the one casting the spell. In one temple library, an untranslated papyrus lies locked in a copper casket. Rumors say it holds a ritual so powerful it caused 3 acolytes to collapse upon reading it aloud. The spell within, they claim, compels a person to see only the caster in every reflection, to taste their name in food, to dream their body each night. It is not a love spell, it is possession. Those who used it were called shapers of the soul, feared more than assassins. Many erotic spells were prayers cloaked in rhythm and repetition. They were sung beneath breath, often during bathing rituals, or while grinding powders under moonlight. Let his eyes follow my hips, as the sun follows Ra. Let his breath falter at my scent, like the fields when water returns. These words, when said with belief and desire, were thought to bend reality ever so slightly, and sometimes slightly was enough. In the Red Quarter of Thebes, courtesans were taught more than dance. They learned which oils sparked longing, which herbs to crush into wine, and how to weave secret words into laughter. A glance held for 4 seconds was a promise. A touch on the left wrist was a summoning. These were not women of low status. They were spiritual tacticians, trained to awaken gods that slumbered within men's flesh. Men practiced these arts too. Warriors returning from war sometimes sought the help of love magicians to win over wives they had not seen in years. They would walk into the marketplace with amulets tucked into their belts, rubbed with oils blessed by Perverted. Their steps grew slower when their spell succeeded, the pull of magic tugging at their intended. They believed the magic was love. They rarely questioned how it worked. One of the oldest erotic spells ever found was written not on papyrus, but on a shard of pottery. It reads, "If he touches her hair, his mouth shall thirst until it finds her neck. If she sees his hands, her knees shall grow weak." This was found in a peasant's home, suggesting that desire was not the domain of nobles alone. The poor, too, whispered enchantments to kindle flames in cold nights. Erotic magic was often passed from mother to daughter, hidden behind lullabies and stories of star-crossed lovers. A girl might be taught to trace a symbol of Hathor on her tongue before speaking to the one she wanted. She might sleep with a rose beneath her pillow to draw him into her dreams. These rites became part of the fabric of femininity, not wickedness, but wisdom, folded into the softness of everyday life. Yet there were darker rites, ones performed in solitude, with blood instead of oil. These were for the desperate, the scorned, the hungry. They asked the gods not for love but for control, vengeance, and total submission. One such spell, attributed to a priestess named Amos, required the burning of a scarab amulet and the recitation of 72 names of a target while touching a black cat's paw. The spell was said to erase resistance, to turn a lover into a shadow. The House of Life, where scribes trained in medicine and magic, kept records of victims who had fallen under erotic enchantments. They did not bleed or bruise, but they lost weight, forgot their names, laughed at things no one else could see. Healers called it soul sickness. They would wash the afflicted with natron, burn, juniper, and chant reversals. But not all were saved. Some walked into the desert, never to return, chasing a vision no one else could see. One tale tells of a dancer named Citra, who enchanted a priest of Pata with a spell of longing. She placed crushed acacia in his wine and drew symbols in his path with ash. He followed her for weeks, abandoning his duties, carving her name into every temple pillar he passed. When the spell was finally broken, he wept, not because he had been bewitched but because the desire remained, hollow and burning. Erotic spells were not always spoken aloud. Some were carved into the soles of sandals, so that every step would press the desire deeper into the earth. Some were baked into bread, eaten by the target during festivals. Others were painted in honey on mirrors, then licked away in private chambers while staring into one's own eyes. The gods were not blind to these acts. Some, it was believed, even delighted in them. An elite circle of women in the court of Ramses, too, were said to hold monthly ceremonies of erotic invocation. Draped in gold-threaded veils, they would gather beneath a sycamore tree and offer songs to Hathor, asking for both affection and dominance. During these rites, they drank from a sacred bowl filled with wine, pomegranate, and something unnamed. Their laughter was said to carry into the dreams of soldiers resting miles away. There is mention in one obscure text of a forbidden manuscript called the Silk Verses, hidden in a tomb outside Helios, said to be dictated by a half-mortal lover of a god. The scroll described rites that involved breath manipulation, simultaneous chanting, and mirrored movements. It was not about pleasure, but merging, becoming one, dissolving ego. It is believed those who performed the final verse never returned to themselves. Erotic magic did not always end in union. Many stories warn of lovers who were drawn too close, whose desires entangled so deeply that they could not be undone. One tale speaks of 2 women who cast spells upon the same man. When he could not choose, his body split in 2, one half for each, neither whole again. The women lived in sorrow, and their story became a cautionary tale, sung during spring rites. The gods themselves were not immune to love spells. In myths, Isis bewitched Ra to gain his secret name, using a serpent of desire and a poison of curiosity. Even the king of the heavens could be brought low by enchantment. His power surrendered not by sword but by longing. This story was repeated by temple dancers who sought to remind their patrons that all men, no matter how mighty, could fall. protective. Charms were often worn to ward off unwanted love spells. Amulets shaped like lions, serpents, or closed eyes were strung on copper wire and dipped in river water. Some believed a whisper offered to the moon could cleanse enchantments made during the day. But for every protection, there was a counterspell, and the game of magic was endless, like the river's winding course through time. Erotic spells were not evil by nature. They were tools. A knife can slice bread or draw blood. A word can woo or wound. The ancients understood this deeply. They did not fear magic, they feared imbalance. A spell cast in desperation could collapse a family. A charm worn in arrogance could summon ruin. And so, they walked the line carefully, reverently, often trembling as they crossed it. In the end, what the Egyptians feared most was not the spell itself, but the echo it left. Once bound by desire, the heart could never return to its original shape. It would ache differently, beat differently. The spell might fade, but its imprint remained, etched not on skin, but on the soul. That, they believed, was the true cost of erotic magic. Not the danger of being caught, but the sorrow of never being unbound. Even now, beneath ruins and sand, tiny scrolls lie hidden in niches carved by trembling hands. They carry the scent of musk and rose, the smudge of ancient fingers, the echo of a whisper said in longing. Their words are old, but their power lingers. For desire, once conjured, never truly dies. It sleeps, it waits, it listens for a name. Long before the names of pharaohs were etched in gold upon obelisks, and long before the gods were shuffled into temples like chess pieces, there rose a king whose name whispered change through the stony arteries of Egypt. Akhenaten, not born tainted. He was born into light, as all royalty was. But somewhere between the cradle and the crown, a shadow curled around his vision. It was not merely religion he reshaped. It was desire, authority, and the soul of Egypt itself. Akon, once named Amenhotep IV, broke from the old gods, not out of clarity, but obsession. The sun, Discarton, became his singular fixation. No longer would Amun, Ra, Osiris, or Thoth rule the heavens in tangled pantheons. Akhenaten made the gods vanish behind a veil of solar flame. His fascination was not only spiritual. Many scholars now see it as deeply sensual love of exposure, of golden light upon bare skin, of the god that touched everything intimately. He moved his court to Akatana, now Amarna, a city carved out of nothing but his will. Its limestone walls gleamed under Aten's gaze, open and uncovered. No shadows, no secrets, no old dogma. But this openness was not purity. In its nude clarity, a new kind of secrecy formed, one that hid in plain sight. Erotic murals, strange, effeminate depictions of the pharaoh, and ambiguous postures dominated the palaces. His reign was not modest. It was a theater of androgyny and suggestion. Depictions of Akhenaten show a body unlike any pharaoh before him. Wide hips, narrow chest, elongated face, and full lips. Some claim it was illness. Others insist it was an intentional transformation, a breaking of the masculine divine, merging god and goddess, desire and power, into one sacred body. In this shape, Akhenaten was not a man. He was a vessel, one who demanded worship not just as ruler, but as living art. He married Nefertiti, the queen whose beauty still haunts museums and scholars. But theirs was not a conventional union. Rumors spread that Nefertiti practiced her own rites of pleasure, invoking Hathor at night and luring dancers to her hidden chambers. Some believed she wore a man's beard in secret ceremonies. Others whispered she stood at the throne when Akhenaten could not, ruling through the force of charm, ritual, and magic as fierce as her husband's solar sermons. Their daughters were named after aspects of the sun, their limbs inked in royal ink and sometimes dressed in garb once reserved for sacred courtesans. The boundary between family and ritual was blurred, dangerously so. Statues of Akhenaten, caressing his daughters, have made historians fumble for explanations. Devotion, they say symbolism, but the intimacy in the stonework is uncomfortable, as though carved by hands too familiar with flesh. In the private sanctums of Amarna, poetry was etched into alabaster bowls, hidden under wine tables and pillow stones. His fingers trace my spine like sunlight over dunes. One line reads, "I am naked under his name." These were not hymns to Aten, but to Akhenaten himself. It is believed palace scribes were instructed to record the king's touches as divine events. His kisses became scripture, his sighs, ritual. Some say Akhenaten abolished temples only to make his body the new sanctuary. Worship was no longer external, it became internal, embodied. His presence was intoxicating. Servants fell mute when he entered. Soldiers turned away their eyes, not out of fear, but reverence feigned with desire. He walked among them barefoot, robes flowing, skin kissed by the god who never slept. Those who followed him did so not with loyalty, but with longing. The pharaoh hosted twilight gatherings in the palace gardens, not feasts, but ceremonies of touch and trance. Harpists played chords meant to mimic the voice of the god Aten. Women and men alike bathed in milk infused with blue lotus. Wine was laced with mandrake, honey, and pomegranate. Guests left these ceremonies changed, some euphoric, others hollowed. What happened between the marble columns was known only to the moon. The royal court became a laboratory of sacred sensuality. It is believed Akhenaten sought to unlock the essence of divine union, not through war, but through erotic harmony. His scribes noted dreams in which he saw the gods melting into each other, breasts and beards, thighs and wings tangled together in golden light. He commanded sculptors to recreate these dreams. Some statues, found shattered in buried vaults, show androgynous figures clasping both ankhs and phalluses. One scroll, discovered in the ruins of Amarna, recounts a night when Akhenaten summoned twin dancers from Nubia. He bathed them in saffron and bound their ankles with sun-threaded silk. As they danced, he read from a papyrus he had written himself, the breath of Aten through flesh. The scroll describes how one must hold the body of another, as one would hold the gods raised gently, but without resistance. Historians have debated whether Akhenaten had lovers beyond Nefertiti. Some suggest a male companion named Smenkhare may have been more than a corregent. Their statues were found side by side, identical in posture, hands almost touching. One broken relief shows Akhenaten kissing a figure whose name was chiseled away. The erasure was not vandalism, it was ritual. A sacred forgetting, meant to protect a secret too intimate to preserve. Even the architecture of Amarna reflected his desires. Rooms without corners, designed to embrace and encircle. Soft light poured from high windows like fingers. Floors were covered in scented reeds and thin mats. Mirrors were placed not for vanity, but reflection of divine union. Walls pulsed with images of touch, closed mouths open, limbs curved into crescents of silent rapture. This was not luxury, it was theology. In the schools of scribes, boys were taught new scriptglyphs meant to record sensation, a symbol for the warmth of breath, another for the weight of anticipation. They were forbidden to speak these aloud, only to write them in devotion, in secret, on slips of linen tucked beneath the king's bedding. Each morning Akhenaten would read these offerings as prayers. His skin was the new scroll, his sleep, the altar. Akhenaten claimed to channel Aten's pleasure. His orgasms, he told his inner circle, were echoes of creation itself. Just as Aten had birthed the world through will alone, so too could summon life through desire. This belief bordered on madness to some, but others swore the air itself trembled when he made love. Nefertiti's attendants claimed to faint outside the room when the two were joined. He issued decrees banning modesty. In Amarna, nudity was not shameful, it was sacred. Servants were required to wash their bodies thrice daily. Perfume fountains bubbled in public squares. Even the animals were brushed with scented oils. Every being under Aten's gaze, Akhenaten insisted, must be clean, open, and adored. Lust was not a sign, it was sunlight filtered through flesh. Akhenaten's downfall did not come from war, it came from discomfort. The people could not follow where he led. His ideas were too fluid, his rituals too intimate. After his death, Amarna was abandoned, his name scratched from walls, his statues buried or broken. A new pharaoh restored the old gods and whispered prayers for forgetting. But forgetting has a fragile spine. Beneath dust and ruin, the memory of Akhenaten stirs. His erotic theology, his sensual architecture, his whispered rites, they survive in fragments. In a carved thigh here, in a poem without a name there. His reign was brief, but it bled deeply into the veins of Egyptian history. He was not merely a pharaoh, he was the first of the tainted line, the one who dared to make desire holy. To some, Akhenaten was a visionary, to others a heretic, but none deny his power. He seduced a nation with sunlight and reshaped its gods with the heat of his hunger. He left no tomb to mark his resting place, only a trail of heat behind him, the echo of sandalwood and breath, and the lingering question, What if he had not been erased? What if his dreams of erotic divinity had flourished? Those who whisper his name now do so not in reverence, but in awe. For he remains unmatched, a monarch who dared to anoint lust with divinity, to fuse the body and the cosmos in golden silence. In the dark chambers of forgotten temples, where the walls still remember, his image lingers, neither god nor man, but something both and something altogether more dangerous. In the hushed folds of history where truth dissolves into myth, the name of Pharaoh Pepe II emerges like a strange mirage, glittering with wealth, draped in incense and shadowed by whispers. His reign was among the longest in the world, stretching past 90 years, but longevity does not cleanse. For those who walked the night corridors of his palace knew there were rites whispered behind closed veils, rituals so drenched in secrecy that even the gods turned their gaze. Pepe II ascended the throne as a child, barely 6 years old. At such a tender age, he was surrounded not by playmates, but by advisors, priests, and women whose roles blurred the lines between guardianship and indoctrination. From his earliest years, his education was infused with power, sensuality, and the belief that the pharaoh was not merely a ruler, but a god who could indulge in what others must only imagine. Boundaries for him were illusions. As he aged, he developed a hunger not just for control, but for emotional possession. He was not known for great battles or bold reforms. He was known for building inward, constructing rooms within rooms, sanctuaries within sanctuaries. Hidden beneath the vast palaces were chambers without windows, where music echoed unnaturally, and no man entered unless summoned at night. They called these rooms the silence below. The stories that survived through carvings half-scratched and papyri, deliberately obscured, speak of a young Pepe who grew into a man surrounded by eunuchs, dancers, and strange musicians. The latter played instruments made from bones and rare reeds, which produced a music so soft it made listeners weep. The pharaoh used these sounds to guide his private ceremonies, rituals not recorded in temple scrolls, but kept in secret oral transmission through the lineage of his priests. One infamous tale preserved on a fragmented ostracon in describes the king's desire for stimulation beyond human limits. He ordered that all scents of Egypt be gathered and blended into a single elixir: cinnamon, lotus, civet, and amber, so potent that even birds fell from the sky when the flask was He would anoint his body with this concoction, then lie in marble basins while attendants read poems into his ears, their breath mingling with perfume. There was a boy named Sassanet, whose name appears in glyphs that suggest both intimacy and status. He was not royalty, nor priest, but chosen. At 13, he was taken from the house of scribes and trained in the whisper rites. These rites involved touch, rhythm, and silence, used not for pleasure alone, but for prophecy. It is said that in Sassanet's embrace, Pepe II saw visions of coming floods, of collapsing dynasties, of his own death appearing as a mirror cracked in moonlight. One of the most disturbing tales involves Pepe II's affinity for those not yet ripened by age. A letter, possibly apocryphal, recovered from Elephantine Island, describes his order for 100 small boys to be sent, each to carry a rose, each to be unblemished. Whether this was part of a fertility rite or something darker, no one dared say. The text ends abruptly, the last line smudged as if someone's hand trembled at the final words, while temples to Ra were open and visible. Pepe II commissioned a hidden shrine to Base, the dwarf god of protection, fertility, and lewdness. Behind a series of moving walls and singing doors, a mural was uncovered centuries later, Best dancing with bare women, their stomachs swollen, their eyes closed in ecstasy. The painting was unlike anything in Egyptian public art, suggestive of rites carried out with rhythmic abandon, and Pepe himself is painted among them, not as a ruler, but a participant. Animals, too, played roles in his rituals, not in cruelty, but in symbolism. White doves were released in certain ceremonies to represent released desire. Felines perfumed and decorated with lapis collars were allowed to roam during the midnight rites. Their soft steps were said to awaken the energy of Hathor, the goddess of love and intoxication. Their purring was used as a hypnotic device, mingling with chants to lull participants into trance-like states. Notably, there was a courtyard known only as the Field of Breath. Here, nude dancers mimicked the movements of wind and water, their choreography practiced for months. At the ceremony's climax, Pepe II would emerge from behind a gold curtain, his body glowing with oils, and walk among the dancers. Sometimes he would not speak for hours, merely touching those who approached, reading their body language like scripture. The boundary between sensual ritual and spiritual practice was paper-thin. In his eyes, desire was not indulgence, it was worship. To be aroused was to be opened. To be opened was to be divine. He saw the body as a temple, the act of intimacy as offering. It was this ideology that alienated the priests of Amen, who believed he had crossed into heresy, redefining piety in flesh and sigh. He reportedly developed a chamber called the Echo Room, its walls layered with silver and obsidian. Sounds, even whispers, were reflected endlessly, distorted into eerie harmony. Here, Pepe would lie beneath thin veils, while priests recited invocations backwards, and dancers spun until collapsing. It was believed that within these echoes, spirits could speak and old gods could return, summoned by breath and desire. The Queen Mother, Ankizempipi, once the regent during his early rule, vanished from the records abruptly. Some speculated she grew horrified by what her son had become. Others believed she participated in early ceremonies and later withdrew, her presence sealed behind stone and forgotten. A tomb bearing her name remains unfinished, half carved, half erased, as though someone wished her never to have existed. As age thickened around him, Pepe II did not lose his taste for ritual, he merely refined it. His lovers became fewer but more symbolic. One concubine, named Neferu, was said to never speak, only gesture. She communicated solely through scent, leaving trails of jasmine and myrrh as language. When she died, Pepe sealed her body in a mirrored sarcophagus and placed it at the heart of the Forbidden Wing. No one was permitted to enter it again. There were priests who fled. Scrolls recovered from desert caves record confessions from those who abandoned the palace, claiming nightmares and curses followed them. One wrote, "His touch opened things in me that do not belong in this world." Another claimed the pharaoh had summoned a serpent of light, wrapped it around himself, and vanished in smoke. In the final years of his reign, famine swept Egypt. The people murmured that the gods had turned their backs, but Pepe remained in his palace, surrounded by golden mirrors, lost in rites no one understood. He anointed statues with wine, painted his chambers with stars, and performed ceremonies for invisible guests. He was not mad. He was consumed by visions, by desire, by a hunger for something Egypt was not ready to understand. When he died, no public mourning was held. His burial was secret, his tomb small and without fanfare. The priests who buried him sealed the entrance, not just with stone, but with spells of forgetting. They wished to erase him not for crime, but for fear that his rituals might awaken again, ripple into the dreams of future kings. But Egypt remembers in layers. What is buried is not always lost. Pepe too remains a figure of fascination and dread. His legacy, though obscured, pulses beneath the surface of Egyptian myth like a second heart. He was a pharaoh who reigned not with swords or chariots, but with oil, silk, and silence. His rituals, whether born of ecstasy or madness, forever changed how power could be touched, tasted, and remembered. And though his name was nearly lost, his shadow lingers in every tale told in whispers. Within the silken walls of the royal harems, where the air was thick with perfume and jealousy, conspiracies bloomed like lotus flowers in the Nile, though officially secluded for beauty, entertainment, and the sacred birthing of heirs. These harems were far from passive sanctuaries. They were arenas of quiet warfare, where information, affection, and the human body were currency. Behind every painted eye and bejeweled ankle, a secret waited, coiled and watching. The harem was not simply a space of leisure, it was a hive of strategy. Women were educated in music and seduction, but also in politics, code, and surveillance. From the reign of Thutmose to the final days of Ramses, the inner sanctum of the palace was home to more than just queens and concubines. It was the domain of spies cloaked in silk, whispering in languages lost to stone, trained to serve not only desire but dynasty. Some of these women were planted by foreign rulers, gifted under the guise of diplomacy. Nubian princesses, Syrian dancers, Libyan storytellers, each arrived bearing gifts of flesh. But beneath their smiles were minds sharpened by courts and vengeance. They came with charms, yes, but also with eyes attuned to the movement of power. The pharaoh, believing himself master, often never suspected that his most intimate companions were vessels of influence beyond Egypt. There existed a coded gesture system inside the harems, taught from generation to generation: a tilt of the fan, the placement of anklets, the color of incense burned at night all meant something. To those uninitiated, it was art. To those within, it was espionage. A concubine could signal a message to another across the courtyard, using nothing but the arrangement of her braided hair or the tilt of her kohl-lined eyes. Queen Tai, wife of Amenhotep III, was said to have controlled an underground network of harem informants. She posed as an aging matron, quiet and withdrawn, but in truth, she was the silent flame behind a dozen failed coups and several assassinations. She rarely spoke above a whisper, and never made direct threats. Instead, she sent perfumed letters folded in animal skins, their meanings wrapped in poetry and scent. Many pharaohs underestimated their harems, believing them to be isolated realms of female softness and distraction. But within those chambers, bribes were exchanged in laughter, threats veiled in lullabies. A spy could kill without ever raising a hand. She only needed to weep at the right time, or withhold touch until paranoia bloomed. These tactics didn't scar the flesh, they scarred the mind. One of the most chilling tales is that of the concubine Heferu, whose origins remain unknown. She was said to have eyes the color of dusk, and a voice like honey dissolving. Pepai, under her spell, began dreaming of blood and betrayal. She would sing to him as he bathed, her lyrics describing ships sinking, enemies rising, hearts pierced by golden pins. He dismissed them as songs until a general was found dead the very next day, with a lotus shoved down his throat. Erotic spies were not limited to the harem itself. Some were placed among temple dancers, wine servers, scribes, and even animal tenders. They infiltrated the system so thoroughly that it became difficult to distinguish genuine affection from political seduction. A lover's moan could be the echo of a strategy. A moment of pleasure could cost a general his life. Trust was a luxury few could afford. Eroticism was used to soften hearts and loosen tongues. Stories circulated of a priest who confessed state secrets while lying on a bed of black silk, believing he was alone with a goddess incarnate. She vanished the next morning, and so did the scrolls from the temple vault. The pharaoh never questioned where she had come from, only why his enemies now seemed 2 steps ahead. Among the most elaborate conspiracies was one involving 3 sisters of the lower harem. Known by their nicknames Whisper, Fire, and Shadow, they coordinated a silent coup from within. Each seduced a different minister of the pharaoh, gathered details about troop movements, and passed messages sewn into their undergarments. Their plan nearly succeeded, halted only when a eunuch loyal to the queen overheard a coded lullaby not meant for his ears. The eunuchs themselves were often suspected, yet rarely questioned. They wandered freely, their sexuality dismissed as neutral, their presence invisible. Some were fierce loyalists, others deeply embedded agents. One, named Pacer, was known to walk through walls of pleasure and betrayal alike, carrying news in poems that he sang while pouring wine. Few realized he spoke truths until it was too late. Even gods were not immune from being invoked in these schemes. Bastet, goddess of cats and secrets, was frequently honored by these erotic spies. Altars to her appeared in hidden corners of the harem, where women left drops of wine and strands of hair, praying for invisibility or clarity. Some claimed that those who pleased her could become shadow-like, slipping from room to room unseen, their feet leaving no echo. Magic was also a weapon. Love spells written in blue ink and menstrual blood were slipped beneath pillows, burned under moonlight, or whispered during moments of climax. These incantations blurred the line between emotion and control. A pharaoh entranced by such spells might believe his feelings genuine, never knowing they were woven from herbs, heat, and divine manipulation. The harem was not static, it had layers. The inner harem housed those closest to the king. The outer contained those awaiting favor, and the lower levels stored secrets and forgotten women. Some who fell out of favor were imprisoned within, kept alive in silence, their only revenge being the secrets they held. Occasionally, their tales escaped through a poem, a riddle, or a dying servant's final confession. When new queens entered, they often purged the harem, claiming it as a rebirth. But the rituals continued. Erotic spies evolved, adapting their seduction to new rules, new gods, new kings. Some even bore royal children, embedding their influence in bloodlines. A single night of charm could shift dynasties if the result was a childbearing. Pharaoh's eyes and another woman's cunning. In the reign of Seti I, records mention a trial held in total darkness. A queen accused a concubine of seducing a visiting prince to extract battle plans. The concubine spoke only 3 words. He kissed first. The court fell silent, and she was exiled, not executed. Years later, that same prince led an army with intimate knowledge of Thebes' layout, suggesting the spy's mission had long succeeded. The erotic spies of the harem didn't always survive long. Those who failed were poisoned quietly, their names scraped from jars and tombs. But the successful ones left no trace. They lived and died in whispers. They were not remembered for beauty alone, but for how they manipulated the threads of fate with every soft word, every arched brow, every lingering gaze. Their legacy lives not in temples but in the undercurrent of Egyptian myth. A belief that pleasure and danger are twin serpents, coiled around the staff of power. That in the stillest rooms, where curtains sway and perfume lingers, empires may shift with a kiss. And in the world of ancient Egypt, no battlefield was more dangerous or more sacred than the velvet corridors of the royal harem. They were not wives nor slaves. They were shadow queens, priestesses of seduction and masters of manipulation. In their soft laughter, revolutions were born. In their silence, kings fell. Senusret III, one of Egypt's most formidable pharaohs, is remembered for his military genius and vast building projects. Yet hidden beneath the granite visage of this ruler lies a tale rarely told, one of a secret sanctuary known as the House of Twin Mirrors. This enigmatic place was not merely a chamber or temple, but a nexus of mysticism and desire, where reflections and reality blurred, and the boundaries of self dissolved into shadow and light. The House of Twin Mirrors was said to have been constructed deep within the labyrinthine corridors of the royal palace at Abydos. Unlike the public halls adorned with statues and hieroglyphs proclaiming the king's power, this sanctuary was accessible only through a concealed door behind a tapestry embroidered with golden serpents. Only Senusret III and a select few knew its location, guarded by an order of priests sworn to silence. Within the sanctuary, 2 large obsidian mirrors faced each other, their surfaces polished so perfectly they created an infinite corridor of reflections. Legend claims that Senusret would enter this chamber alone, surrounded by flickering oil lamps, and gaze into the endless depths, seeking not just visions of the future, but an unspoken merging of his soul with another's. The mirrors were said to reflect not the physical, but the unseen desires trapped within the heart. Priests who served in the house were bound by ritual and secrecy. They prepared Senusret with incense blends made from lotus, myrrh, and crushed lapis lazuli, believed to awaken the spiritual eye. The king's body was anointed with oils laced with honey and crushed almonds to soften the skin and heighten sensation. Each ceremony lasted until dawn, as chants layered in harmonic resonance filled the chamber, weaving a tapestry of sound that bent perception. The purpose of the house was not merely mystical, but intensely erotic. The dual mirrors symbolized the union of opposites day and night, male and female, mortal and divine. It was believed that when the king's gaze met his own reflection, infinitely multiplied, he could unlock layers of hidden passion and power, merging with an ideal self or lover reflected in the endless depths. This act was both a meditation and an invocation of desire. Courtiers whispered that Senusret was not alone in these visions. Through the mirrored corridor, spirits of past queens, lovers, and gods appeared, flickering and shifting between shadow and light. It was said he conversed with them, sometimes losing himself for hours, unable to distinguish between his own voice and theirs. Some priests feared the king's mind became fragmented, caught between worlds, while others believed he was transcending human limitations. The House of Twin Mirrors was also a place where erotic magic was practiced in its most refined form. Priests crafted spells to be whispered during the ceremonies, intended to awaken the king's divine magnetism and draw forth his potent energy. These spells were carved into crystal tablets and held beneath the king's pillow. Their words blended imagery of flesh, light, and breath, invoking the goddess Hathor and the god Min, patrons of fertility and desire. Behind the mirrored sanctuary, a hidden alcove contained intricate statues of intertwined lovers, sculpted from alabaster and inlaid with gold leaf. These statues were not simply decorative, they were ritual tools, representing the sacred merging of masculine and feminine energies that Senusret sought to embody. Each figure held a lotus blossom, symbolizing purity amid passion, and their expressions were serene, caught in eternal union. Legend tells of a ritual known as the binding of reflections, performed only during the solstice. During this rite, Senusret would adorn himself with garments woven from silk and gold threads, and two priestesses cloaked in veils embroidered with stars would join him in the house. Together, they would trace patterns on the mirrors with oils scented with frankincense and cedar, weaving a visual symphony intended to trap desire within the reflective depths. The interplay of light and shadow in the sanctuary was said to induce trance-like states. The flickering flames multiplied endlessly between the twin mirrors, creating illusions of movement and transformation. Observers claimed the chamber seemed to breathe, alive with energy that oscillated between ecstasy and menace. It was a liminal space, where time folded back upon itself, and boundaries between king and subject, lover and god, faded. The house also functioned as a training ground for the king's closest confidants. Selected courtiers were taught the rituals of reflection, learning to manipulate mirrors and light to evoke illusions that could mesmerize and influence. These lessons extended beyond magic. They were a form of political theater, training spies and emissaries in subtle persuasion and seduction, teaching them how to become reflections of the king's will. Some stories speak of Senusret's favorite priestess, a woman named Merit, who was said to possess an uncanny ability to vanish into shadows and reappear as a reflection. She was his closest companion in the house, guiding him through the maze of mirrors and mysteries. Their bond was rumored to transcend the physical. She was both muse and mirror, reflecting back the king's deepest desires and fears. There is an unfinished relief found in a temple near Abydos that depicts a figure holding two mirrors, their surfaces rippling like water. Scholars debate whether this represents Senusret or Merit, or perhaps both merged as one. The inscription beneath reads cryptically, "In the echo of endless eyes, the soul finds both captivity and liberation." This phrase captures the dual nature of the house, both a sanctuary and a prison. Despite its secrecy, rumors of the house's power spread throughout the court. Foreign dignitaries were both fascinated and fearful, believing the king possessed a supernatural charm that made his rule unassailable. Some whispered that the House of Twin Mirrors was the source of his legendary virility, the key to his long reign, and the reason for his unyielding will. But with such power came danger. Some courtiers warned that Senusret risked losing himself. In the reflections, stories circulated of moments when the king seemed distant, his eyes glazed as if trapped in another world. There were even rumors that during one ceremony, he became so enraptured that he failed to distinguish his own hand from the mirror's surface, reaching out only to grasp empty glass. The house was also the site of secretive political maneuvering. Priests and courtiers used its rituals to communicate coded messages, manipulating shadows and reflections to pass information unseen. It became a hub for conspiracies, where whispers bounced endlessly between the mirrors, and trust was a fragile illusion. Some plots were uncovered only because a reflection betrayed the betrayer. Intriguingly, the House of Twin Mirrors was linked to fertility rites. Some texts suggest that the king believed the mirrored rituals would not only enhance his power, but ensured the fertility of the land and his lineage. The reflections were thought to multiply the potency of his desire, spreading it like sunlight across the fields and into the bodies of his heirs. The sanctuary's magic was also said to extend beyond Egypt's borders. Envoys from Nubia and the Levant reportedly sought secret audiences, hoping to glimpse the house or learn its secrets. They believed that Senusret's command over reflection and desire gave him an edge in diplomacy and warfare alike, a king who could literally see into the hearts of his enemies. After Senusret's death, the House of Twin Mirrors was sealed, and its location lost to time. Some believe the mirrors were shattered to prevent their power from falling into the wrong hands, while others say they remain hidden, waiting for a future ruler to unlock their mysteries. Its legacy survives in fragment stories told in hushed tones, and glimpses of infinite reflections in ancient texts. Modern archaeologists have speculated about the house's existence, piecing together clues from ruins and cryptic inscriptions. Yet much remains unknown. The duality at its heart, the merging of self and other, light and shadow, desire and power, continues to captivate those who seek to understand. Egypt's most intimate secrets, Senusret III's fascination with the House of Twin Mirrors reveals a king who saw himself not merely as a ruler of men and land, but as a master of unseen realms. His quest for unity between opposites mirrored the Egyptian cosmology, but also pushed boundaries into the personal and the mystical, blending sovereignty with seduction in ways few could comprehend. The house embodied a profound truth. His reflection: to rule is to be seen, to be mirrored in the eyes of others, and to hold that image captive. Senusret's sanctuary was a testament to the ancient Egyptian understanding that desire and dominion are entwined, and that sometimes the greatest battles are waged not with armies, but within the endless corridors of the self. In the rich tapestry of ancient Egyptian life, animals held a sacred place not only as companions and symbols, but also as conduits of divine energy and, intriguingly, as mirrors to human desire. Among the most secret and taboo aspects of this relationship were the complex intersections of animal instincts and human lust, a territory shrouded in both fascination and strict ritual control. To navigate these impulses, Egyptian temples devised a system of punishments and rites designed to contain, redirect, or expunge desires considered unnatural or dangerous. Animals were everywhere in Egypt, from the sacred cats of Bastet to the crocodiles worshipped in Sobek's cult, and the ibis revered by Thoth. Their behavior was studied not only for omens, but also as examples of raw, instinctual force. Yet, some temple texts reveal that the line between admiration and fear was thin. Priests warned that unchecked animal desires in humans could lead to chaos, impurity, and the wrath of the gods. Thus, a moral and spiritual framework developed, wherein the most taboo acts involving animals were met with severe temple punishments. The notion of animal desire extended beyond physical acts. It referred to primal urges, wild passions, and the loss of human restraint. These impulses were thought to upset the cosmic order, or mat, that balanced the universe. Temples became centers not just of worship, but of discipline, where transgressors were brought before priests for judgment. The severity of punishments varied, reflecting the perceived threat each act posed to society and the gods. One particularly dark aspect of temple justice was the use of public shaming. Offenders accused of bestiality or inappropriate lust with animals were paraded through the streets, their faces smeared with ash or painted with symbolic markings to denote their sin. Priests would chant curses, invoking Sekhmet's fierce wrath to purify the land of their impurity. These spectacles were meant to deter others, reinforcing the sanctity of the human-animal divide. The punishments themselves ranged from exile to ritual cleansing, but in extreme cases, the temples employed physical penalties. Records mention the use of scourging with reeds soaked in natron, a harsh desiccant that burned the skin, as well as forced labor in temple granaries or quarries. The goal was not only to punish, but to transform the offender's base instincts into renewed dedication to Mat. Animal desires were also symbolically addressed through ritual. Dramas performed within temple courts, actors donned masks of animals, enacting stories of gods and mortals entangled in lust and punishment. These performances served as moral lessons and catharsis, allowing communities to confront fears and taboos within a controlled setting. Line between the sacred and the profane blurred, illustrating the ongoing tension between human nature and divine order. The god Min, patron of fertility and sexuality, held a complicated role in this context. While Min celebrated the power of desire, his worship often included rites aimed at controlling and channeling lust responsibly. Temples dedicated to Min featured rituals where sexual energy was ritually expressed and then contained through symbolic acts, reflecting the dual nature of desire as both creative and potentially destructive. Sacred animals themselves were subject to strict rules. Killing or harming a cat, for example, could result in death penalty. The reverence for these creatures underscored the belief that animals embodied divine presence. Thus, sexual acts involving animals were considered not only immoral but sacrilegious, offenses against the gods themselves. Such transgressions threatened the delicate relationship between humanity and the divine world. Some temple texts speak of polluted lust, a condition where a person's desire was believed to be contaminated by animalistic impulses. This spiritual affliction was thought to cloud the soul, making the individual vulnerable to possession by chaotic forces. Healing rituals involved purification baths, recitations of protective spells, and offerings to gods like Thoth and Anubis, who guided souls and balanced chaos. The psychological dimensions of these beliefs were profound. Ancient Egyptians understood the dangers of obsession and unrestrained passion. By linking such impulses to animal creatures governed by instinct, they framed human lust as something to be mastered. Temples became centers of psycho-spiritual training, where priests served as guides, healers, and enforcers of moral boundaries. Despite the harsh penalties, there is evidence of complex attitudes towards sexuality and desire in Egyptian society. Erotic art and poetry reveal an acceptance of sensuality as part of life's cycle. The tension lay in controlling when and how desire was expressed. Animal desires represented the chaotic, untamed side of human nature that had to be contained for society to function and for individuals to maintain their divine favor. Some scholars suggest that certain temple punishments served a political function, reinforcing the authority of the priesthood by demonstrating their power over both body and spirit. By policing the most taboo desires, they upheld social order and asserted control over sexuality, which could otherwise be a source of instability and rebellion. Records of confessions made before the divine tribunal of Osiris include admissions of sinful lust involving animals. These were rarely detailed, but the repetition of such charges indicates they were a real concern. The confessions were part of the spiritual cleansing necessary to pass safely into the afterlife, emphasizing the eternal consequences of such transgressions. The relationship between animal desires and temple punishments also reflected broader cosmological themes. Egyptians saw the world as a constant battle between order and chaos. Unchecked desire, especially that which blurred species boundaries, was chaos incarnate. Punishments were thus cosmic acts to restore balance, echoing the mythic battles of gods who fought to keep the universe intact. Interestingly, some myths involve gods themselves transgressing boundaries. Stories of Set's lust for animals or the trickery of Anubis sometimes served as allegories for the dangers of unrestrained desire. These narratives warned mortals about the thin line separating divine power and destructive chaos. There were also ritualized acknowledgments of these primal forces in festivals and mystery rites. During certain times of the year, controlled expressions of wildness were permitted, often involving masks and dances that evoked animal spirits. These events allowed a temporary release of suppressed desires, reinforcing social bonds and spiritual renewal. The temple punishments extended beyond physical acts to the realm of dreams and visions. Priests interpreted nightmares involving animals as signs of spiritual imbalance. Such visions required elaborate exorcisms and protective rituals, reinforcing the belief that animal desires could invade the mind as well as the body. Animal desires were further encoded in the symbolism of amulets and talismans. Certain figures such as lions or serpents represented power over base instincts and protection from their corrupting influence. Wearing these charms was both a personal and spiritual defense against temptation and chaos. The link between animal desires and temple discipline also played a role in gender dynamics. Female sexuality was more closely policed, with women accused of transgressions often facing harsher punishments. This reflects the broader patriarchal structure of ancient Egyptian society, where control over female bodies was tied to maintaining social and divine order. In conclusion, the interplay between animal desires and temple punishments reveals a society deeply aware of the complexities of human nature. Ancient Egyptians recognized that desire was both a source of life and potential destruction. Their rituals, laws, and myths reflect a profound attempt to balance these forces, ensuring that passions served not chaos but the divine order of Mat. Through these layers of belief and practice, we glimpse a civilization wrestling with the primal impulses that shape existence, and the lengths they went to preserve harmony between the human and the divine, the instinctual and the spiritual, the animal and the god. Amenhotep IV, later known as Akhenaten, is infamous not only for his radical religious reforms but also for the darker shadows cast over his reign, particularly the brutal executions of his concubines. These women, once symbols of favor and royal intimacy, became victims of an unforgiving purge that shook the foundations of the palace. The reasons behind these executions remain clouded in mystery. Wrapped in whispers of jealousy, political intrigue, and religious fanaticism, The royal harem was a labyrinth of power and peril, where concubines lived in splendor but walked a knife's edge. Under Amenhotep IV, the delicate balance between affection and danger tipped violently. It is said that the king, obsessed with his singular devotion to the Aten, saw the women as distractions, temptresses, pulling him away from divine purpose. Yet, the executions suggest deeper fears, perhaps that these women held secrets or loyalties to the old gods and court factions. Records from the Amarna period are scarce and often cryptic, but fragments of papyri hint at a series of trials held in secret chambers. These sessions were not public spectacles, but whispered judgments delivered by priests loyal to the new order. Concubines accused of conspiring to undermine the monotheistic revolution were detained, their fates sealed with no chance for defense. The accusations ranged from witchcraft to betrayal, sometimes vague and unsubstantiated, but always deadly. One particularly notorious case involved a concubine named Rhea, who was said to have been a favorite of Amenhotep before the purges. Her fall was swift and brutal. Some sources suggest she tried to maintain allegiance to the traditional gods, perhaps even engaging in secret rites. When discovered, her punishment was meant as a warning. Her execution was carried out in the sacred precincts, where silence was absolute, and the echoes of her cries never reached the palace halls. The execution methods were as varied as they were cruel. Some concubines were drowned in the Nile, symbolically purifying their supposed sins in the river's sacred waters. Others faced more terrifying ends: burial alive in sealed tombs, strangulation by priestesses, or being left to perish in underground chambers without food or light. These acts were framed as necessary sacrifices to preserve the spiritual purity of the kingdom. The psychological terror extended beyond the condemned women. Other concubines lived in constant fear, their every move watched by eunuchs and priests. Trust was impossible, and alliances shifted like desert sands. The royal bedchambers, once places of intimacy, became sites of suspicion and betrayal. The king's gaze was no longer warm. It was cold and searching for signs of disloyalty. This purge also targeted women who bore children to Amenhotep IV, creating tensions around succession. Sons and daughters by condemned concubines faced stigma, their legitimacy questioned. This instability threatened to unravel the fragile new order the king sought to build. Yet Akhenaten remained unwavering, convinced that the sacrifices were required to establish a pure, divine reign under Aten alone. Priests played a pivotal role in these executions. Their religious zealotry fueled the purges, as they believed that the old god's influence lingered in the women's bloodlines and practices. Some priests reportedly used these trials to consolidate power, eliminating rivals and gaining favor. With the king, the intertwining of religious fervor and political ambition created a deadly brew. With the concubines caught in the crossfire, the palace archives hint at secret communications smuggled out by eunuchs and servants, letters describing midnight arrests and silent processions leading to the execution grounds. These messages reveal a court gripped by paranoia, where even the slightest whisper of dissent could be fatal. Yet, few dared to oppose the king openly, for fear of sharing the concubines' grim fate. Interestingly, some concubines managed to survive by navigating the dangerous waters of palace politics. They adopted new religious identities, publicly renouncing old beliefs and embracing Aten worship with fervor. Others formed alliances with powerful priestesses or officials, securing protection through strategic marriages or promises of loyalty. Survival required more than beauty. It demanded cunning and absolute submission. The impact of these executions rippled beyond the palace walls. Nobles and officials who had supported the traditional gods grew fearful, suspecting that their own families might be next. This fear contributed to unrest and weakened the cohesion of the kingdom. Some scholars argue that these purges hastened the decline of Akhenaten's reign, sowing seeds of rebellion and discontent that blossomed after his death. Art from the Amarna period reflects the tension and turmoil beneath the surface. While official depictions show serene scenes of divine worship, subtle details betray anxiety: figures with downcast eyes, empty spaces where attendants should be, and unfinished frescoes. Some of these artworks may have been created by artists sympathetic to the condemned concubines, encoding messages of mourning and resistance. One chilling detail involves a cryptic poem discovered on a broken tablet, believed to be penned by a concubine awaiting execution. It speaks of betrayal, loss, and the cold silence that follows death. The poem ends with a plea for remembrance, a desperate attempt to escape oblivion through words. This fragment reminds us that behind the political and religious narratives were human lives caught in tragic fates. The king's relationship with Queen Nefertiti during this period remains enigmatic. Some historians speculate she played a role in the purges, perhaps as an enforcer of the new religious order, or as a rival asserting her own power. Others view her as a protector of certain concubines, seeking to temper the king's wrath. Their dynamic adds another layer of complexity to the palace intrigues. Foreign observers, such as the Hittites and Mitanni, recorded rumors of the executions and the unrest in Egypt. These accounts, while fragmentary, suggest that the purges undermined Egypt's standing abroad, making allies question the stability of the regime. Diplomatic ties were strained as foreign courts hesitated to engage with a kingdom perceived as unstable and cruel. Religious texts from later periods condemn Akhenaten's reign as heretical and destructive, but they also hint at the severity of the concubine executions. These retrospective condemnations may have served to justify the harsh actions, framing them as necessary purifications rather than atrocities. Yet, the tone of regret and warning suggests that even ancient Egyptians recognized the tragedy of these purges. The executions had lasting effects on the royal bloodline. Many descendants of the purged concubines vanished from historical records, their names erased or replaced. This erasure served both to cleanse the royal lineage and to rewrite history in favor of the Aten worshippers. It also created gaps in genealogies that continue to puzzle modern Egyptologist. In some secret chambers, scribes recorded the events with sorrow and fear. These unofficial records, discovered centuries later, offer glimpses into the human cost of the purges: the tears of mothers, the silence of children, the heavy hearts of eunuchs forced to carry out orders. They remind us that behind the grandeur of pharaonic rule lay pain and sacrifice hidden from the public eye. The concubine executions also influenced Egyptian literature and folklore. Stories circulated about ghostly figures haunting the palace, women seeking justice or revenge from beyond the grave. These tales served as cautionary reminders of the dangers of unchecked power and the cost of fanaticism. They also preserved the memory of those silenced by history. Some modern scholars interpret the executions as part of a broader campaign of cultural revolution. Amenhotep IV sought to break not only religious traditions but also social and political structures that supported the old order. The purge of concubines symbolized a radical severing of ties to the past, though it came at a devastating human price. The nature of these executions challenges modern perceptions of ancient Egypt as a stable and orderly society. They reveal a court rife with fear, manipulation, and violence beneath its polished surface. The purges highlight the fragility of power and the lengths rulers would go to enforce ideological conformity. Yet even amidst the darkness, there were moments of resistance and resilience. Some concubines reportedly escaped the palace, finding refuge among loyalists or foreign lands. Their stories, though lost to history, remind us that even the most brutal regimes face cracks where humanity endures. Ultimately, the concubine executions of Amenhotep IV stand as a stark testament to the perils of absolute power entwined with religious zeal. They reveal a pharaoh torn between divinity and mortality, vision and paranoia. In seeking to reshape Egypt's soul, he sacrificed those closest to him, leaving scars that echoed long after the sun set on his reign. Pharaoh Ramses III, often hailed as one of Egypt's last great warrior kings, presided over a kingdom that was both mighty and fragile. His reign was marked by fierce battles against invading sea peoples and ambitious architectural projects. But beneath this veneer of strength lurked dark events few dared to recount. Among these was the Night of Screaming Statues, a mysterious and terrifying incident that unfolded within the sacred precincts of his palace and temples, shaking the foundations of royal power. The night began as any other, with the palace guards keeping watch over the sleeping king and his court. But as the moon reached its zenith, an unnatural cacophony shattered the silence. Statues, ancient and revered, seemed to erupt into screams, human-like wails that echoed through stone corridors and courtyards. These sounds were not mere echoes or the creaking of aging monuments. Witnesses described them as cries of anguish and fury, sentient voices trapped in cold granite. Priests and seers were summoned immediately, their faces pale with dread. Such phenomena were unprecedented, signaling a breach between the divine and mortal realms. In Egyptian belief, statues were vessels for the god's presence. Their voices meant communication or warning. The night of screaming statues was interpreted as a dire omen, a manifestation of the gods' wrath or grief over events unfolding in the royal court. Some accounts link the event to the infamous harem conspiracy, a plot against Ramses III's life, orchestrated by one of his secondary wives, Tai, and her allies. It is said that the statues cried out to warn the king, but he ignored the signs, believing the palace secure. The screams, therefore, represented both a supernatural protest and a chilling prophecy and echo of betrayal lurking within the walls. The statues involved were no ordinary effigies. Among them were colossal stone representations of gods, such as Amun, Ptah, and Sekhmet, each carved with intricate precision and imbued with protective spells. Their unexpected outcry unsettled even the most seasoned priests, who had long tended to their silent presence. Ancient texts describe frantic rituals conducted through the night, attempting to soothe the offended deities and seal the breach. One priest, named Kemwaset, documented the event in a scroll, later hidden in a tomb. His writings convey a mixture of fear and reverence, depicting how the screams varied. Some were mournful, others furious, as if the statues lamented both the king's actions and the suffering of Egypt itself. He believed the statues' voices were the anguished souls of past kings, bound in stone and witnessing the decline of divine order. The echoes of the screaming statues spread beyond the palace, stirring unrest among the populace. Commoners and nobles alike whispered of curses and divine punishment. Markets closed early, and many fled to rural temples seeking protection. The night became a catalyst for widespread fear, shaking confidence in Ramses III's ability to maintain the sacred balance essential to Egypt's survival. Scholars have debated the physical cause of the phenomenon. Some propose natural explanations, such as seismic activity causing statues to emit strange sounds through fissures. Others suggest a form of acoustic trickery or hallucination induced by incense and ritualistic chanting. Yet, these theories fail to capture the profound spiritual impact the event had on the ancient Egyptians. The night of screaming statues was followed by a period of intensified religious activity. Ramses III ordered grand ceremonies to appease the gods, including offerings and public prayers. New statues were commissioned, and older ones re-enshrined with additional spells. The king's advisors urged vigilance, interpreting the event as a warning against internal corruption and external threats. Among the palace intrigues, the conspiracy to assassinate Ramses III gained momentum. Tai's faction sought to place her son Pentuer on the throne, believing the current king's reign had lost divine favor. The screams of the statues were seen as a divine endorsement of their cause, emboldening conspirators who believed they acted in service to higher powers. Despite warnings, Ramses III was ultimately attacked. The harem conspiracy culminated in an assassination attempt, as revealed by the judicial papyrus of Turin. Whether the screaming statues played a direct role in alerting the king remains speculative, but the event's symbolic weight lingered. It underscored the fragile intersection of power, faith, and betrayal within the royal household. The priest's efforts to contain the spiritual chaos involved elaborate rites. Sacred chants, purification ceremonies, and symbolic offerings were performed for days. The statues themselves were ritually washed, anointed with oils, and wrapped in linen bandages, reflecting the belief that even stone could be healed and comforted like a living being. These acts aimed to restore harmony and reaffirm the god's protection. The event also inspired artistic expressions. Reliefs and murals in later temples depict statues with open mouths, surrounded by swirling energies, perhaps attempts to memorialize the night's terror and the god's voice. These images served as reminders of the need for vigilance and piety, warning future generations against hubris and neglect. Ramses III's health declined in the aftermath, possibly worsened by the stress of court conspiracies and spiritual turmoil. Some scholars theorize that the king was poisoned during the conspiracy, a fate hinted at by forensic examinations of his mummy. The night of screaming statues thus marked not only a spiritual crisis, but a turning point in his reign. The phenomenon left an indelible mark on Egyptian religious thought. It reinforced the concept that divine power was not distant but active and communicative, capable of intervening in human affairs. Statues, traditionally silent and inert, were acknowledged as living vessels that could express joy, anger, and warning, blurring the line between stone and spirit. In folklore, the night of screaming statues transformed into a cautionary tale. Storytellers recounted how the gods' voices could shatter silence to protect or punish, urging respect for the divine and fidelity to the king. These tales contributed to the mystique surrounding Ramses III's reign and the sacred objects of Egypt. Some priests claimed that the statues' screams were the echoes of Egypt itself, suffering under threats from foreign invaders and internal discord. The event was interpreted as a call for unity and renewal, a spiritual alarm to awaken the people to the dangers facing their civilization. Despite its terrifying nature, the night of screaming statues ultimately strengthened Ramses III's resolve. He doubled efforts to secure the borders and reinforce religious institutions, striving to restore balance. His legacy, though marred by conspiracies, reflects a king who faced both earthly enemies and supernatural warnings. The night also deepened the priests' influence in court affairs. Their role as mediators between gods and mortals became more pronounced, as kings recognized the necessity of divine favor for political survival. The screams validated their authority, reinforcing the power of temple rituals and sacred knowledge. Centuries later, the memory of that night continued to haunt Egyptian culture. References appear in later texts and temple inscriptions, often cryptic but evocative. The event's blend of terror and divine communication captures the essence of Egyptian spirituality, a world where gods could break silence to shape destiny. The Night of Screaming Statues stands as a powerful symbol of Egypt's complex relationship with the divine. The fragile nature of power, and the ever-present tension between seen and unseen forces. It reminds us that in ancient Egypt, stone could speak, and when it did, the very soul of the kingdom trembled. In ancient Egypt, the concept of sacred incest was not merely a taboo broken in shadow, but a deliberate and divine act meant to preserve the purity of the royal bloodline. Pharaohs and their families often engaged in close-kin marriages, including unions between siblings or between a father and daughter, to maintain what they believed was a direct connection to the gods. This practice was embedded in religious ideology and political necessity, shaping the very fabric of Egypt's dynastic power. The divine origins of the royal family were traced to gods such as Osiris and Isis, whose myth itself was one of brother-sister union. This celestial example set a precedent, positioning incestuous relationships as sacred rituals, not acts of moral deviance. By emulating the gods, Egyptian royalty claimed to embody divine qualities, ensuring their legitimacy and unbroken link to divine will. Incestuous marriages were especially prevalent among the 18th and 19th dynasties, when the consolidation of power and religious reform demanded a tightly controlled succession. The practice was legitimized through religious ceremonies that framed these unions as offerings to the gods themselves, sanctifying what elsewhere would be condemned. The pharaoh was not just a ruler but a living god on earth, and his family mirrored the divine order. The political function of sacred incest was multifaceted. It prevented dilution of royal blood by outsiders, reducing risks of rebellion from competing noble houses. Marrying within the family kept wealth, land, and power consolidated. It also created a closed circuit of loyalty and trust in a court rife with intrigue and assassination plots. Yet, sacred incest was not universally accepted among all strata of Egyptian society. Common people viewed it with ambivalence, often shrouding it in silence or superstition. Outside the palace walls, such unions were rare and sometimes harshly punished, underscoring the exceptional status of the royal family. This dichotomy between royal privilege and public morality highlights the complex social dynamics of ancient Egypt. Pharaohs like Tutankhamun and Ramses II are known to have married their sisters or half-sisters, cementing alliances within their families. These marriages were not merely private affairs but public displays of divine unity. Royal couples appeared together in statues and reliefs, their intertwined forms symbolizing cosmic harmony and the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The children born from these unions were considered the purest vessels of divine essence. Their legitimacy was beyond question, and they were groomed to inherit not only the throne but the spiritual responsibilities of maintaining the sacred balance of the universe. The continuity of divine blood was essential for Egypt's stability and prosperity. Religious texts and temple inscriptions often praised the sacredness of these bloodlines. The pharaoh was described as son of the sun and beloved of the gods, titles reinforced by his genealogical purity. Divine incest became a tool of myth-making, intertwining theology with genealogy in ways that elevated the pharaoh above ordinary mortals. Despite its sacred framing, incestuous relationships brought biological consequences. The close interbreeding within royal families likely contributed to health problems, deformities, and early deaths noted among several pharaohs. Mummies and skeletal remains reveal signs of genetic disorders, hinting at the hidden costs of preserving divine purity. Ancient Egyptian medicine and rituals attempted to mitigate these effects through protective charms, amulets, and prayers. Two gods of healing. The priesthood played a crucial role in monitoring royal health, combining empirical knowledge with spiritual practices to safeguard the sacred lineage. Their involvement underscores the inseparability of religion and biology in Egyptian thought. The secrecy and sanctity surrounding sacred incest also fueled rumors and scandal, both in antiquity and among modern scholars. Some historians suggest that certain marriages were politically motivated forcades, with biological parentage obscured to protect the divine narrative. The blending of truth and myth complicates our understanding of these unions. Sacred incest also influenced gender roles within the royal family. Queens who were sisters or daughters of the pharaoh held immense power, not only as mothers of heirs, but as priestesses and political actors. Their dual roles as family members and divine consorts amplified their influence, positioning them as vital links between the gods and the people. The phenomenon extended beyond marriage to sexual rituals associated with fertility and kingship. Some cults reenacted divine incest myths through sacred marriages, performed by priests and priestesses embodying god and goddess roles. These ceremonies reinforced the cosmic order and the pharaoh's unique place within it. Critically, sacred incest was not merely about biology, but about the symbolism of unity and purity. The pharaoh's body was a microcosm of Egypt itself. Maintaining harmony required preserving its sacred essence. Bloodlines were threads in a tapestry woven by the gods, and any impurity threatened cosmic balance. Despite its central role, sacred incest was subject to change and challenge over time. Shifts in religious beliefs, foreign influences, and political upheavals occasionally questioned or altered these practices. The Amarna period, with its monotheistic reform under Akhenaten, introduced new dynamics that disrupted traditional bloodline arrangements. Archaeological findings, including tomb inscriptions and genealogical records, provide glimpses into the lived realities of these unions. Letters, legal documents, and funerary texts reveal the tensions between divine mandate and human emotion, hinting at complex personal relationships beneath the religious veneer. Modern genetics has opened new avenues of understanding, allowing scientists to test theories about royal lineages and health. DNA analyses of mummies have confirmed familial ties and raised questions about the effects of inbreeding. These findings add a scientific dimension to ancient narratives, bridging past and present. The legacy of sacred incest resonates in Egyptian culture and beyond. It challenges modern assumptions about morality, power, and religion, forcing a reconsideration of how societies construct and maintain authority. It also illustrates how myth and reality intertwine in shaping history. Ultimately, sacred incest in ancient Egypt was a paradox of practice, simultaneously revered and fraught with risk. It was a mechanism of divine connection and political control, a source of strength and vulnerability. Through this lens, we glimpse the profound complexities of a civilization striving to unite heaven and earth through blood. This practice reminds us that ancient Egypt's world was one where the sacred and the profane coexisted, and where kingship demanded both divine heritage and human sacrifice. Sacred incest was a testament to the lengths they would go to uphold a vision of cosmic order, weaving family and faith into an unbreakable bond that defined their civilization. Pharaoh Khafre, ruler of Egypt's 4th dynasty, is widely recognized for commissioning the second-largest pyramid at Giza and the enigmatic Great Sphinx. Yet behind these monumental achievements lay an intense and peculiar preoccupation. an obsession with death and the afterlife that shaped both his reign and his legacy. This fixation permeated his architectural projects, religious policies, and personal rituals, reflecting a deep, perhaps troubling, relationship with mortality. Khefer's obsession with the dead was not merely about ensuring his own immortality, but extended to a broader desire to master the forces that governed life beyond the grave. Ancient Egyptian belief held that death was a transition, a journey fraught with danger and mystery. Khefer's efforts suggest he sought not only protection for his soul, but control over the very nature of death itself. Positioning himself as an intermediary between worlds, his pyramid complex, more compact, yet more imposing than his father Khufu's, was designed with meticulous attention to mortuary function. The complex included elaborate mortuary temples, causeways, and subsidiary tombs for priests, underscoring Khefer's intent to maintain eternal worship. This architectural focus reveals his determination to create a nexus where life and death coexisted, sustaining his spirit eternally. The Great Sphinx, carved from a single limestone ridge, is perhaps the most vivid symbol of Khefer's obsession. This lion-bodied, human-headed guardian seems to embody a fusion of strength, wisdom, and death's enigma. Scholars debate whether Khafre commissioned the Sphinx, but if so, its role was to serve as a sentinel over his necropolis, warding off evil spirits and asserting his eternal dominion. Khafre's fascination with the dead extended to the rituals performed in his honor. Priests conducted daily ceremonies in the mortuary temples, offering food, incense, and prayers to sustain the king's Khafre's life force in the afterlife. These rituals were vital, for without them, it was believed, the king's spirit would wither and die anew. Trapped between worlds. Records from the period reveal that Khafre invested heavily in the cult of the dead, endowing temples and commissioning statues intended to house his spirit if his tomb were ever violated. The proliferation of his likeness in stone and wood reflects an effort to replicate his presence across the land, a way to defy physical death through eternal representation. The king's obsession also manifested in his burial practices. His sarcophagus, though lost to time, was said to be crafted from solid granite, designed to protect his remains against both natural decay and supernatural forces. Such precautions underscore Khafre's anxiety about death's threats and his desire to secure his journey into eternity. Khafre's court was permeated with symbols of death and rebirth, from the Ankh of life to the Jed pillar symbolizing stability. These emblems adorned jewelry, ceremonial items, and architecture, reminding all that death was a passage toward renewal. Yet for Khafre, these symbols were not abstract. They were tangible tools in his quest to conquer mortality. Intriguingly, some texts suggest that Khafre engaged in esoteric practices aimed at communing with the dead. Secret chambers within his pyramid complex may have been used for ritualistic ceremonies involving the invocation of ancestral spirits, though evidence is scant. Such practices align with his overarching preoccupation with death's mysteries. The king's obsession may also have stemmed from personal fears. Ancient Egypt was rife with threats from political rivals to natural disasters. Death was an ever-present specter. Khafre's fixation could be seen as a psychological response, an attempt to wrest control over the ultimate unknown and affirm his divine right despite mortality's certainty. Khafre's obsession had social consequences. The resources devoted to his mortuary cult were immense, requiring labor, wealth, and religious personnel that might otherwise have supported the living. This allocation of power and wealth to the dead's service reflects the king's prioritization of the afterlife over temporal affairs, influencing governance and economy. The mortuary cult's persistence long after Khafre's death attests to the effectiveness of his obsession. Priests maintained rituals for centuries, ensuring the king's spirit remained potent. This ongoing veneration solidified Khafre's place in the Egyptian pantheon of revered ancestors, blurring the lines between mortal king and deity. Khafre's obsession also influenced artistic conventions. Statues from his reign often depict him with idealized features, serene expressions, and regal pose images designed to transcend time and communicate eternal authority. These artistic choices reflect the desire to immortalize not just the king's image, but his very essence. The king's concern with death extended to his family. Tombs for queens and relatives were included within or near his complex, emphasizing the continuity of divine bloodlines and the shared fate of death and rebirth. This family focus highlights the importance of collective immortality in Kepha's worldview, yet this fixation was not without its darker sides. Some scholars speculate that Kepha's obsession may have contributed to paranoia, leading to court intrigues marked by suspicion and suppression. The king's desire to control death could have extended to controlling life's uncertainties, creating an atmosphere of fear and strict ritual observance. Kepha's obsession is also evident in his interactions with the priesthood. By empowering priests who managed his cult, he cemented an alliance between throne and temple, intertwining religious authority with royal power. This relationship ensured the perpetuation of his legacy, but also increased the priest's influence in political matters. The great Sphinx itself became a site of mystery and reverence, its gaze a silent reminder of Kepha's enduring presence. Over centuries, the monument inspired myths of guardianship and resurrection, linking Kepha's death obsession to Egypt's cultural memory and spiritual imagination. The afterlife obsession also shaped burial practices beyond the king. Nobles and officials emulated Kepha's rituals, commissioning elaborate tombs and mortuary cults to secure their own place in eternity. This diffusion of royal death culture influenced Egyptian society at large, reinforcing beliefs about mortality and divinity. Kepha's fixation on death inspired theological developments. Concepts of the soul's journey, judgment before Osiris, and the importance of funerary texts gained prominence, enriching Egyptian religion's complexity. The king's personal concerns thus had far-reaching spiritual consequences. Modern archaeological discoveries, including the partially excavated Kepha pyramid and the Sphinx's restoration efforts, continue to shed light on the material legacy of his obsession. These findings reveal the monumental scale and intricate symbolism embedded in his mortuary projects. Kepha's reign stands as a testament to the profound role death played in shaping ancient Egyptian kingship. His obsession with the dead was not merely personal but foundational to his rule, blending architecture, religion, art, and politics into a single, enduring vision. Through Kepha's eyes, death was not an end but a passage, a realm to be mastered, feared, and celebrated. His obsession immortalized him not only in stone but in the collective consciousness of Egypt, where the boundaries between life and death, king and god, remain forever entwined. The Whispering Scroll of Junaroi is one of the most enigmatic and haunting relics discovered within the dusty chambers of an ancient Theban tomb. This scroll, fragile and yellowed with age, contains an esoteric text penned in a mixture of hieratic script and cryptic glyphs that defy easy translation. Unlike most funerary documents designed to secure safe passage into the afterlife, Junaroi's scroll is whispered to contain forbidden knowledge, secrets that blurred the line between the living and the dead, between mortal fate and divine will. Junaroi himself was a high-ranking scribe and priest, serving in the court of Pharaoh Seti. His position granted him access to sacred rituals and restricted temples, yet his scroll suggests a descent beyond official knowledge into realms few dared to explore. The manuscript reads less like prayer and more like a dialogue, voices murmuring from beyond, secrets passed between worlds through carefully encoded language. The scroll's opening lines invoke deities associated with death and rebirth, including Anubis and Osiris, but quickly shift into dark invocations that suggest Junaroi sought to pierce the veil between life and death. The words speak of a ritual that grants the power to command shadows and spirits, a forbidden art that could either save or doom a soul depending on the wielder's intentions. Ancient scholars, who have attempted to decode the scroll, warn of its dangerous content. The language itself appears designed to alter the reader's perception, with repeating incantations that echo in the mind long after reading. Some claim that those who studied the scroll to deeply suffer madness or spiritual torment, as if the whispers contained within awakened forces best left dormant. The physical scroll is adorned with intricate illustrations, serpents coiling around, eyes, skeletal hands reaching from mist, and stars bleeding into rivers of darkness. These images do not merely decorate, but act as metaphysical keys, unlocking meanings hidden beneath the text. The interplay of word and image suggests a ritualistic purpose. The scroll was meant to be both read and experienced. Junaroi's motivations remain a subject of speculation. Was he driven by a desperate desire to protect his soul from a malevolent afterlife? Or did he seek forbidden power to influence the world of the living? The lack of corroborating texts leaves his true intent shrouded in mystery. fueling legends, that he vanished shortly after composing the scroll, swallowed by the very shadows he invoked. The scroll's provenance is equally shadowy. Discovered in a sealed crypt beneath the Valley of the Kings, it was carefully wrapped in linen and hidden among funerary goods, meant to safeguard the tomb's occupant. Its presence there hints that Juniroi believed the scroll held the key to surviving death's final judgment, or even mastering the afterlife itself. Ancient Egyptian society was deeply ambivalent about such forbidden knowledge. While the pursuit of eternal life was a universal quest, the crossing of certain spiritual boundaries was considered dangerous and taboo. The Whispering Scroll stands at this edge-on artifact of curiosity, fear, and profound spiritual risk. Religious authorities likely condemned the practices hinted at in the scroll. Secret police of the temples might have hunted down practitioners who delved too far into necromancy or shadow magic. Juniroi's scroll represents a risky flirtation with these forbidden arts, a dangerous challenge to the divine order of Mat. The scroll's text describes a ritual performed under a new moon, in a chamber where sunlight never reaches. Participants must wear masks fashioned from animal bones, recite names of forgotten gods, and offer sacrifices that blur lines between life and death. The ritual's aim is to summon the whispering dead spirits, who reveal truths about the mortal realm and divine fate. One passage warns of consequences for failure. Those who cannot control the summoned forces may become eternal shadows, lost between worlds, neither dead nor alive. This terrifying fate encapsulates ancient fears about the dangers of meddling with death, reminding us that the scroll's power was double-edged. The whispering voices within the text also suggest a philosophy about death and knowledge, that the boundary between life and death is permeable, and that wisdom requires risking the soul's safety. Juniroi appears to embrace this risk, seeking secrets hidden from ordinary mortals, even if it meant courting madness or destruction. Over centuries, the scroll passed through the hands of a few trusted priests, each adding marginal notes warning future readers to beware. These annotations provide glimpses into how knowledge was both preserved and feared, a precious burden carried with care and dread. Modern Egyptologists continue to study the scroll with caution. Its text challenges translation software and defies conventional understanding of Egyptian. Some speculate it represents a form of proto-cultism within ancient religion, a glimpse into secret traditions erased from official history. The scroll's narrative suggests a cosmology where spirits and gods communicate through layered realities. The whispering is more than metaphor. It implies an interactive relationship between worlds, where knowledge is exchanged but never fully grasped by mortals. Juniroi's scroll also emphasizes the power of language itself. The words are magic shaping reality, bending fate, and transforming souls. This belief in the performative power of language resonates with broader Egyptian religious practice, where spells and hymns were vital tools in the cosmic struggle between order and chaos. Interestingly, some elements of the scroll parallel later mystical traditions, suggesting that its influence may have extended beyond ancient Egypt. Concepts of shadow spirits and whispered secrets echo in later Mediterranean occultism, hinting at a hidden thread of esoteric knowledge flowing through history. The scroll's illustrations have inspired artists and writers, imagining worlds where shadow and light dance, and where the dead speak in riddles. These creative responses underscore the scroll's enduring mystique and its capacity to evoke both wonder and unease. In recent years, attempts to digitally reconstruct the scroll's damaged sections have revealed faint traces of lost text, promising future insights. However, the full meaning remains tantalizingly out of reach, preserved in cryptic whispers and shadows. The Whispering Scroll of Juniroi challenges our understanding of ancient Egypt as a civilization of order and harmony. It reveals a darker undercurrent, where knowledge, power, and fear intersected in complex ways, and where individuals dared to walk the line between life and death. As a relic, it embodies the human desire to know the unknowable and the peril that accompanies such quests. Juniroi's voice, carried across millennia in whispers, invites us to ponder the boundaries of knowledge and the costs of crossing them. Ultimately, the scroll serves as a haunting reminder that ancient Egypt's spiritual landscape was as rich in mystery and danger as it was in splendor. It invites us to listen closely to the whispers between the lines, and to the shadows that linger just beyond the light. In the intricate and highly ordered society of ancient Egypt, Objects were not merely tools or ornaments, they were imbued with spiritual essence and practical purpose, integral to daily life and ritual. This belief extended even to broken or unused items, which were not discarded lightly. The concept of punishment of the broken and unused reflects the cultural and religious importance placed on preserving the sanctity and function of objects, especially those connected to the divine or the afterlife. When items such as statues, ritual vessels, amulets, or tools became broken, damaged, or obsolete, they were subjected to specific rites that resembled punishment. This was not a punitive act in a human sense, but a symbolic response aimed at preventing spiritual contamination or disrespect toward the gods. The broken objects were considered to have lost their divine potency, and therefore required ritual disposal or correction. The ancient Egyptians believed that every object possessed a form of ka, or life force, particularly items crafted for religious use. When this life force was compromised through damage or neglect, the object was thought to harbor malevolent energy. Such objects could endanger humans or disturb cosmic order, if not dealt with appropriately. The punishment served as a form of cleansing or transformation, neutralizing the object's corrupted essence. One method of punishment involved burial or careful disposal in cache pits, where broken statues and ritual implements were interred beneath temple floors or secluded areas. These caches acted as sanctuaries for the damaged objects, allowing their life forces to return to the earth in a controlled and respectful manner. Archaeological discoveries of such caches reveal intricate care rather than careless abandonment. In some cases, the damaged items were ritually killed before disposal. This involved symbolic acts, such as breaking the object further, incising spells upon it, or using ritual incantations to sever its spiritual link to the living world. The death of the object was a necessary step to ensure it would not continue to wield harmful influence or cause imbalance. The punishment also applied to unused objects, particularly those removed from service before their intended purpose was fulfilled. Ritual tools or votive offerings left unused were believed to accumulate stagnant energy, becoming spiritually dangerous. Priests performed ceremonies to deactivate these items, allowing their energies to dissipate without harm. Ancient texts describe these practices as essential to maintaining cosmic harmony. The destruction or burial of broken and unused objects was seen as a microcosm of the natural cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Just as living beings must undergo transformation, so too must the inanimate objects that shared the sacred space of Egypt's temples and tombs. The concept extended beyond physical objects to include words and names inscribed on artifacts. If the name of a deity or a royal personage was scratched out or defaced, the object was believed to carry a curse or spiritual imbalance. Such acts necessitated urgent corrective rituals, often involving the punishment of the object through burning, burial, or symbolic destruction. Punishment of the broken and unused was not merely practical but deeply symbolic. It reflected a worldview in which everything, animate or inanimate, participated in the cosmic order. Neglect or disrespect of an object was tantamount to threatening that order, potentially inviting divine retribution or spiritual chaos. The role of priests in these processes was pivotal. They acted as mediators between the material and spiritual realms, performing the necessary rites to ensure that broken or unused objects were neutralized without harm to the living or the divine. Their knowledge of spells and rituals was vital for preserving balance. Some objects, despite damage, were repaired or ritually renewed to restore their function and sanctity. This restoration was itself a sacred act, reanimating the object's ka and reaffirming its place within the spiritual ecosystem. Such repairs were often performed with elaborate ceremonies, emphasizing the continuity between life and death, wholeness and fragmentation. Archaeological evidence from temple workshops shows that artisans were tasked not only with creating but also with maintaining ritual objects. Their craftsmanship included specialized techniques for repairing or ritually decommissioning items, revealing a sophisticated understanding of material and spiritual integrity. The punishment of broken and unused objects also extended to funerary contexts. Items placed in tombs to accompany the deceased had to be intact and charged with protective spells. Damaged grave goods were sometimes replaced or ritually put to rest to prevent disturbance to the departed soul's journey. Failure to properly punish or dispose of broken objects could result in spiritual contamination or hauntings. Folklore and magical texts warn of restless spirits attached to neglected items, capable of bringing misfortune to households or temples. This belief reinforced the importance of ritual care. The punishment rites often involved offerings to appease offended deities. Gods like Ptah, the divine craftsman, and Thoth, god of wisdom and writing, were invoked to sanctify the transition of broken objects from active use to spiritual retirement. These offerings ensured divine favor and protection. In some texts, objects are personified, portrayed as sentient beings capable of experiencing suffering or joy. The punishment of broken items, then, was conceived not as cruelty but as a form of justice, setting right what was wrong and allowing the object's spirit to move on peacefully. The practice also had social dimensions. Ownership of sacred objects entailed responsibilities, including proper care and eventual punishment if the items failed. Neglect could be seen as a moral failing, reflecting poorly on individuals or institutions and potentially incurring divine displeasure. The broader Egyptian cosmology underscored cyclical transformation. Just as the sun dies each night and is reborn at dawn, so too did objects undergo cycles of use, breakage, and ritual death. The punishment of the broken and unused embodied this eternal rhythm binding the physical and spiritual worlds. Some scholars argue that these practices reveal a unique form of ancient eco-spirituality. By honoring even broken items, Egyptians demonstrated a profound respect for material existence and its spiritual significance, a worldview that contrasts sharply with modern disposable cultures. Punishment rites sometimes involved specific prayers that spoke the object's soul free, releasing it from earthly bonds. These prayers might accompany burial or destruction and served as a final act of kindness and respect toward the object's essence. Certain elite tombs contain inscriptions referencing the punishment of broken funerary goods, indicating that, even in death, the maintenance of cosmic order was paramount. These references highlight the pervasive reach of these beliefs across social strata. The punishment concept extended into mythology as well. Stories about gods destroying or healing objects reflect human concerns about order, chaos, and renewal, mirroring the real-world rituals performed on damaged artifacts. The care taken with broken and unused objects offers insight into ancient Egyptian values: holism, respect for the sacred in all things, and the interdependence of material and spiritual realms. It reveals a culture deeply attuned to the consequences of action and inaction alike. In sum, the punishment of the broken and unused was a vital practice, ensuring that the delicate balance between worlds remained unbroken. Through ritual, reverence, and renewal, the Egyptians transformed loss and decay into opportunities for spiritual harmony and continuity, reinforcing the timeless dance of creation and dissolution. The ancient Egyptian notion of the Kipharao is entwined with tales of excess, forbidden passions, and a descent into madness driven by insatiable desire. This archetype embodies a ruler whose appetites, sexual, political, or spiritual, transgress the boundaries of Mat, the sacred order. The curse of desire reflects how unchecked lust and obsession could unravel even the most powerful pharaohs, transforming them from divine sovereigns into tragic figures consumed by their own passions. In Egyptian cosmology, desire was a potent force capable of creation and destruction. It fueled fertility and renewal, but, when corrupted, threatened chaos. The Kippharao's madness was said to emerge from a perversion of this primal energy, where desire no longer served life's harmony, but spiraled into self-destruction. This curse was more than metaphor. It was believed to be an actual divine punishment for violating sacred limits. Many historical pharaohs, labeled as Kippharaos, exhibited signs of this curse. Their reigns were marked by scandal, erratic behavior, and extreme indulgences. Ancient texts and later stories portray them as both victims and perpetrators, enslaved by lust, yet wielding their madness as a weapon to manipulate courtiers and enemies alike. Their downfall was as swift as their rise. One famous example is Akhenaten, whose religious revolution disrupted centuries of tradition. Scholars debate whether his eccentricities and obsession with the Aten sun disk reflected divine madness or deliberate defiance. The curse of desire manifests in his obsession with a new divine ideal. his court's intimate intrigues, and rumored excesses that scandalized contemporaries. The Kyphareos' madness often had a dual nature. On one hand, a charismatic allure that captivated followers. On the other, a terrifying instability that alienated allies and provoked rebellion. Their desire extended beyond the personal into the political, where obsessive quests for power intertwined with sexual exploits to form a volatile mix. Erotic symbolism permeated their courts, with harem conspiracies, secret lovers, and forbidden rituals enhancing the mythos of the cursed king. These stories, preserved in fragmentary papyri and temple reliefs, hint at a shadow realm where pleasure and pain, devotion and betrayal coexisted in uneasy balance. The curse of desire also encompassed spiritual madness, where the Kypharo believed himself to transcend mortality through sexual and mystical acts. This delusion blurred the line between king and god, leading to behaviors deemed sacrilegious. Priests often opposed these excesses, warning of cosmic consequences if Mat was disturbed. In literature, the madness of desire is depicted through haunting metaphors: fires that consume, rivers that flood and drown, serpents coiling into the heart. These images captured the torment of a soul ensnared by passion, unable to find peace or restraint. The Kyphareos' plight serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unbridled longing. Ancient Egyptian medicine recognized symptoms consistent with what we might call mental illness, though explained through spiritual frameworks. Possession by demons or the god's wrath could cause madness, and intense desire was one pathway to such affliction. Healing rituals combined prayer, magic, and isolation to restore balance. The curse also affected the pharaoh's entourage. Courtiers and family members were drawn into the turbulent vortex of the king's madness, often becoming pawns or victims. Intrigue, jealousy, and violence were commonplace, destabilizing the court and sometimes leading to violent coups or assassinations. Artistic depictions from these periods often show distorted or exaggerated features in statues and reliefs of Kyphareos' elongated limbs, twisted faces symbolizing their inner turmoil and divine punishment. These images contrast sharply with the idealized forms of more balanced rulers, highlighting the spiritual fracture caused by the curse. The harem was a key stage for the curse's drama. Women within the royal household were both objects of desire and agents of intrigue. Some tales speak of lovers who wielded influence over the mad king, while others describe jealous rivals plotting to end the chaos. This dynamic intensified the king's paranoia and fueled further madness. The curse of desire also carried a hereditary aspect. Descendants of Kyphareos were believed to inherit not only blood, but also the spiritual affliction, leading to cycles of decadence and ruin within dynasties. This belief reinforced the importance of ritual purity and strict social order to prevent moral decay. Religious texts sought to contain or reverse the curse through prayers and offerings to gods like Thoth, protector of wisdom, and Sekhmet, goddess of healing and destruction. These rituals aimed to cleanse the pharaoh's spirit, restore Mat, and break the cycle of obsession and madness. Some historians interpret the curse of desire as a metaphor for political instability caused by excess and poor governance. The stories may reflect real events dramatized into spiritual lessons, warning future rulers against allowing personal passions to undermine their duty and the kingdom's welfare. The phenomenon also reveals ancient Egypt's nuanced understanding of human psychology. Rather than denying madness, Egyptian culture integrated it into religious and social frameworks, viewing it as a sign of spiritual imbalance, needing intervention rather than mere punishment. Despite its dark nature, the curse of desire contributed to the mythology surrounding kingship. The tragic Kypharao became a symbol of the fragile boundary between divine power and human frailty, reminding all that even gods on earth could fall victim to their own nature. Literature and temple inscriptions often conclude these tales with a restoration of order, where Mat is re-established through the pharaoh's death or redemption. This cyclical narrative reinforced the hope that balance could be regained, even after profound chaos. Modern interpretations draw parallels between the curse of desire and contemporary concepts of addiction, obsession, and mental health crises. The ancient metaphor resonates across time, illustrating universal human struggles with desire and control. The curse also influenced burial practices. Some Kyphareos were interred with elaborate spells to protect their souls from the consequences. of madness, ensuring safe passage to the afterlife and release from earthly torment. Archaeological evidence suggests that some royal tombs bore signs of hurried construction or deliberate alterations, possibly reflecting attempts to erase or mitigate the legacy of cursed kings whose reigns were seen as disasters. The curse of desire remains a compelling lens through which to view the complexities of Egyptian kingship, where divinity, power, passion, and madness intertwined in a delicate, often tragic dance that shaped the fate of Egypt itself. Asetnefru stands as one of the most compelling and defiant figures in ancient Egyptian history, a queen whose resilience and strategic acumen challenged the patriarchal norms of her time and reshaped the destiny of the kingdom. Her story unfolds during an era fraught with political turmoil and external threats, yet she emerged not as a passive consort but as a formidable leader who fought back against both internal conspiracies and foreign invaders. Born into royalty, Asetneferu's early life was steeped in the traditions of the pharaonic court, where women's roles were largely confined to ritual and support. However, from a young age, she displayed exceptional intelligence and political savvy. Her education included the study of statecraft, diplomacy, and religious right skills that would prove essential in her later struggle to assert power. Her marriage to Pharaoh Djed initially aligned her with the traditional role of queen consort, yet historical records reveal that Asetnefru was far from content with a background position. She cultivated alliances within the priesthood and nobility, creating a network of supporters who recognized her potential as a political force. As Djedka's reign faced increasing instability, marked by regional uprisings and challenges from rival factions, Asetneferu's influence grew. She acted decisively to counter plots aimed at undermining the throne, using her knowledge of court intrigue to expose conspirators and neutralize threats. Her actions earned her both admiration and enmity within the royal court. One of her most significant contributions was her role in reforming the administrative structure of the kingdom. Recognizing inefficiencies and corruption, Asetnefru advocated for changes that strengthened central authority and improved resource management. These reforms helped stabilize Egypt during a period when many neighboring civilizations were experiencing decline. Religious authority was another domain where Asetnefru left her mark. She promoted the worship of goddesses like Hathor and Isis, emphasizing their roles as protectors of the throne and symbols of feminine power. Through public ceremonies and temple endowments, she reinforced her divine legitimacy, positioning herself as both queen and priestess. Her assertiveness extended to military matters as well. While not a warrior herself, Asetnefru was instrumental in organizing defensive campaigns against incursions from Libyan tribes and Nubian raiders. She supported generals loyal to her cause and coordinated supply lines, demonstrating a keen understanding of logistics and warfare. Asetneferu's reign also saw a flourishing of arts and culture, reflecting her commitment to restoring Egypt's grandeur. She sponsored the creation of monumental statues, intricate jewelry, and elaborate tombs, many of which bear inscriptions praising her wisdom and strength. These cultural achievements reinforced her legacy as a queen who balanced power with grace. Despite her successes, Asetnefru faced relentless opposition. Conservative factions viewed her growing authority as a threat to traditional gender roles and attempted to curtail her influence through propaganda and political maneuvering. Rumors and accusations of sorcery circulated, reflecting the fear her power inspired. The queen's resilience was tested further by personal tragedies, including the untimely death of her eldest son, a potential heir. This loss intensified succession struggles and complicated her position. Yet she persevered, rallying supporters and securing her family's future through strategic marriages and alliances. Asetneferu's ability to navigate these challenges demonstrates a mastery of both diplomacy and realpolitik. She employed tactful negotiation with rival factions and foreign powers, balancing assertiveness with caution. Her correspondence with neighboring rulers reveals a sophisticated understanding of international relations. Her legacy is preserved in inscriptions and reliefs that depict her as a protector of Egypt's sovereignty and a champion of justice. These portrayals emphasize qualities traditionally associated with kingship: strength, wisdom, and piety reimagined through a female lens, challenging assumptions about gender and power in ancient Egypt. Asetneferu's tomb, located near the necropolis of Saqqara, is a testament to her enduring influence. Its elaborate decorations and symbolic motifs underscore her role as a ruler who transcended conventional boundaries. Archaeologists continue to study the tomb to uncover further insights into her life and reign. Her story inspired subsequent generations of royal women who sought greater agency within Egypt's patriarchal system. While not all achieved her level of power, Asetneferu's example broadened the possibilities for queenship, introducing a model of female leadership that combined spiritual authority with political acumen. The queen's life also highlights the complex interplay between gender, religion, and politics in ancient Egypt. Her ability to harness religious symbolism to legitimize her rule illustrates how divine ideology could be adapted to support alternative power structures. Scholars debate whether Asetneferu ruled as regent or co-regent following her husband's death, with some suggesting she may have held de facto power in her own right. This ambiguity reflects broader challenges in interpreting ancient sources, where female rulers were often obscured or marginalized. Her final years were marked by continued efforts to secure Egypt's stability amid external pressures and internal factionalism. Despite advancing age, she remained an active participant in court affairs, guiding the transition of power to her successors and ensuring continuity. Asetneferu's death was mourned across the kingdom, with funerary rites befitting a monarch. Her cult persisted for decades, attesting to her lasting spiritual and political significance. Temples dedicated to her memory served as centers of worship and pilgrimage. In modern times, Asetneferu has become a symbol of female empowerment and resilience. Her story challenges simplistic narratives about ancient Egyptian women and offers a nuanced portrait of leadership shaped by courage, intelligence, and unwavering determination. Her life invites us to reconsider the dynamics of power in ancient societies and to recognize the contributions of women who shaped history from behind the throne and beyond. Asetneferu's fight was not only for her survival but for a vision of Egypt where leadership transcended gender. The final queen who fought back remains a figure of fascination and inspiration, her legacy etched in stone and memory, a testament to the strength of a woman who refused to be silenced and whose battle for power reshaped the destiny of a civilization. Among the vast necropolises of ancient Egypt lie countless tombs, silent and enigmatic, many of which bear no names or inscriptions to reveal the identities of their occupants. These tombs without names evoke a haunting mystery, standing as mute witnesses to forgotten lives, lost histories, and untold stories. Their existence challenges our understanding of status, memory, and mortality in a civilization so deeply invested in preserving legacy through elaborate burial rites. The naming of a tomb was a sacred act, intended to ensure the deceased's remembrance and safe passage into the afterlife. Names carved into stone served as magical anchors, binding the individual's soul and body to the physical world. Without a name, the deceased risked fading into oblivion, denied the eternal life promised by Egyptian belief. The absence of names on certain tombs raises questions about who these individuals were and why they were denied this fundamental honor. Some scholars propose that these tombs belonged to criminals, outcasts, or those condemned for transgressions against Mat, the cosmic order. Erasing a name was considered one of the severest posthumous punishments, effectively erasing existence. Other nameless tombs may reflect economic or social circumstances. Not every Egyptian could afford the grand monuments and inscriptions that adorned royal and noble burials. Many commoners or servants received simpler, less decorated tombs, sometimes without inscriptions, reflecting their modest status and limited resources. Interestingly, some of these anonymous tombs are surprisingly elaborate, suggesting occupants of importance whose names were deliberately omitted. Political intrigue, shifts in power, or posthumous disgrace might have led to the erasure of names as acts of damnatio. Memory intentional forgetting enforced by successors. Archaeologists have uncovered tombs where names were chiseled away or plastered over, indicating attempts to obliterate memory. This practice was particularly evident during dynastic struggles or regime changes, when new rulers sought to legitimize themselves by erasing predecessors or rivals from history. The tombs without names also offer insights into the ancient Egyptian concept of identity. The soul's survival depended not only on names, but on rituals, offerings, and community memory. The absence of a name threatened the very fabric of existence, but rituals sometimes sought to compensate, invoking titles or epithets instead. These tombs challenge modern perceptions of identity as fixed and permanent. In the fluid spiritual worldview of ancient Egypt, memory and naming were acts of ongoing creation, vulnerable to human politics and fate. A nameless tomb symbolizes the fragility of legacy and the power dynamics shaping remembrance. Material culture within these tombs, artifacts, pottery, and funerary goods, provides alternative clues to occupants' lives. Symbols, motifs, and burial customs suggest affiliations, professions, or social roles, allowing scholars to piece together stories despite the absence of names. Some nameless tombs may have served collective purposes, housing multiple individuals whose identities were secondary to group or familial affiliation. Such communal burials reflect social realities where individual memory was subsumed under broader social bonds. The location of these tombs within necropolises is also telling. Proximity to royal tombs or sacred sites could indicate attempts to claim spiritual protection or status, even without personal naming. This spatial relationship underscores the interplay between memory, power, and place. The psychological impact of these silent monuments is profound. They confront visitors with absence and anonymity, evoking questions about mortality and the human desire to be remembered. The tombs without names stand as universal reminders of forgotten lives across time and cultures. Ancient texts allude to fears surrounding unnamed dead, believed to be restless spirits wandering without peace. This spiritual limbo highlights the cultural imperative to preserve names and memories as safeguards against chaos and disorder. In some cases, the absence of names results from damage over millennia, erosion, looting, or vandalism. These losses remind us of the fragility of material culture and the challenges inherent in reconstructing history from incomplete evidence. The study of these tombs has spurred innovative archaeological methods, including ground-penetrating radar, residue analysis, and digital reconstruction, aimed at recovering lost information and restoring voices to the silent dead. The tombs without names also invite reflection on ancient Egyptian funerary philosophy, which balanced permanence and while the ideal was eternal remembrance, reality often diverged, producing spaces where anonymity prevailed. These tombs complicate the grand narratives of Egyptian kings and elites by centering forgotten or marginalized individuals, expanding our understanding of social diversity and historical memory. Artistic representations within nameless tombs, when present, often depict generic or symbolic figures rather than individualized portraits, reinforcing themes of universality and collective identity. In religious terms, these tombs may have functioned as sites for communal offerings or rituals, honoring ancestors, linking the living and dead in networks of memory beyond personal names. The preservation of these tombs varies widely, with some remarkably intact and others reduced to foundations. Each state of preservation offers different challenges and opportunities for interpretation. Contemporary interest in the tombs without names reflects broader cultural engagements with anonymity, memory, and the ethics of remembrance in archaeology and history. Ultimately, these tombs serve as poignant monuments to the complexities of death and memory in ancient Egypt, places where silence speaks volumes about identity, power, and the enduring human quest for immortality through remembrance. Perverted, once a vibrant city nestled along the Nile's fertile banks, was famed in ancient Egypt as the city of pleasure, a sanctuary dedicated to the goddess Bastet, protector of joy, music, and sensuality. Unlike the austere temple complexes devoted to other deities, Perverted thrived as a lively hub of celebration, art, and desire, embodying the duality of sacred pleasure and earthly indulgence. Though it has since faded into obscurity, its legacy whispers through history as a place where passion and devotion intertwined. The city's origins trace back to the Middle Kingdom, gradually flourishing into a major cultic center by the New Kingdom. Perverted's temple was not only a religious site, but also a social nucleus, where festivals honoring Bastet's dual nature attracted pilgrims, artists, and revelers alike. The annual celebrations were famous for their exuberance, combining sacred rites with music, dance, and feasting. At the heart of Perverted lay the Grand Temple, adorned with intricate reliefs depicting the goddess as a lioness and a nurturing cat. The temple's walls narrated stories of Bastet's protective power over women, children, and the home, but also her fierce defense of joy and pleasure. This duality made Perbastet unique among Egyptian cities, blending spiritual reverence with worldly delights. The city's streets bustled with musicians playing lyres and drums, dancers weaving intricate patterns, and marketplaces selling perfumes, cosmetics, and luxurious goods. Artisans crafted jewelry and statuettes bearing Bastet's likeness, blending religious symbolism with the aesthetics of beauty and desire. This commerce was integral to the city's economy and its identity. Perbastet also housed a large community of temple dancers and priestesses, many of whom served as both spiritual intermediaries and entertainers. These women held significant status, revered for their ability to channel the goddess's energy through ritual performances. Their dances were believed to invoke Bastet's blessings, ensuring fertility, protection, and happiness. The festivals of Perbastet were legendary for their uninhibited nature. Processions carried statues of the goddess through the city, accompanied by singing, chanting, and elaborate feasts. Participants engaged in acts celebrating love and sensuality, reflecting the city's embrace of pleasure as a divine gift rather than mere indulgence. Visitors to Perbastet often spoke of its intoxicating atmosphere, where boundaries between sacred and profane blurred. The city became a refuge for those seeking release from rigid societal norms, a place where joy was sanctified and desire celebrated openly. This reputation attracted not only Egyptians but also foreigners drawn to its unique spirit. Despite its fame, Perbastet faced challenges. Rival cults viewed its permissiveness with suspicion, and political shifts sometimes led to suppression of its festivals. Yet the city's resilience lay in its ability to adapt, maintaining its core identity while negotiating changing religious and political landscapes. Archaeological excavations have uncovered fragments of the city's grandeur: temple foundations, statues, and ritual objects bearing Bastet's emblem. These findings offer glimpses into a complex society where spirituality and sensuality coexisted in harmony, challenging conventional views of ancient Egyptian religiosity. The city's decline began during the late period, when shifts in religious emphasis and foreign invasions eroded its prominence. Temples fell into disrepair, and the once vibrant festivals waned. Over time, Perbastet was absorbed into larger urban centers, its memory fading into myth and obscurity. Scholars debate the extent to which Perbastet influenced broader Egyptian culture. Some argue it served as a vital counterbalance to more austere religious practices, preserving a cultural space for joy and human pleasure as essential components of spiritual life. The goddess, Bastet, herself, remained central to Egyptian spirituality, but the unique cultural expressions found in Perbastet remind us that ancient religion was multifaceted, encompassing both discipline and delight. The city embodied this balance, celebrating the sacredness of pleasure in a way rarely matched elsewhere. Literary sources from later periods reference Perbastet as a legendary place of ecstasy and worship, suggesting that its memory endured in Egyptian consciousness even after its physical decline. These texts emphasize themes of liberation, healing, and the transformative power of joy. The city's association with cat sacred animals linked to Bastet to its mystique. Cats roamed freely, revered as protectors against evil and symbols of fertility and grace. This feline presence reinforced the city's identity as a space of protection and sensuality. Perbastet's rituals often included offerings of fragrant oils, flowers, and wine, creating sensory experiences that heightened spiritual connection. These practices highlight the importance of the senses in ancient Egyptian worship, emphasizing embodiment and pleasure as pathways to the divine. The city's architecture reflected its ethos, with open courtyards, lush gardens, and spaces designed for communal celebration. This environment fostered social cohesion and reinforced the sacred nature of shared joy, contrasting with more enclosed and hierarchical temple complexes elsewhere. The role of music and dance in Perbastet cannot be overstated. These art forms were integral to ritual and social life, serving both as entertainment and as means of spiritual communication. The city produced renowned musicians and choreographers whose influence spread across Egypt. Trade routes connecting Perbastet with Mediterranean and African regions facilitated cultural exchange, introducing new ideas, goods, and artistic styles. This cosmopolitan character enriched the city's cultural tapestry and contributed to its allure. The forgotten city's disappearance underscores the fragility of cultural memory. Factors such as war, religious reform, and natural decay contributed to its erasure, reminding us that even vibrant centers of life can vanish beneath the sands of time. Contemporary interest in Perverted has revived through archaeological projects and scholarly research, aiming to reconstruct its history and significance. These efforts seek to restore the city's place within the broader narrative of ancient Egyptian civilization. Perverted challenges modern perceptions of ancient Egypt as solely focused on death and the afterlife, revealing a dimension where life, pleasure, and celebration were equally sacred. Its story enriches our understanding of the human experience across millennia. The city's legacy endures, not only in ruins, but in cultural memory, inspiring art, literature, and popular imagination. Perverted invites us to reconsider the role of joy and desire within spiritual traditions, past and present. Ultimately, the forgotten city of pleasure stands as a testament to ancient Egypt's complexity, a civilization capable of embracing both the solemn and the sensual, weaving together the threads of devotion and delight into a vibrant tapestry that continues to captivate the world. In the arid landscapes of ancient Egypt, dust was far more than mere earth and sand. It was a silent witness to the lives, deeds, and secrets of those who walked beneath the blazing sun. The phrase, "the dust holds every sin," captures a profound cultural and spiritual belief that the very ground beneath one's feet retains the echoes of human actions, both noble and ignoble, preserving a record invisible to the eye but potent in the cosmic order. The Egyptians saw dust as a liminal substance, the boundary between the living and the dead, the sacred and the profane. It settled on tombs, temples, and homes alike, silently absorbing the energies of life passing overhead. In this way, dust became a metaphor for memory and judgment, a physical reminder that no sin or virtue could truly be erased. Every act, whether public glory or private transgression, was thought to leave a trace upon the dust. The ground absorbed the weight of unspoken crimes, whispered betrayals, and hidden desires. These invisible stains threatened to disrupt the balance of matter, the principle of order and justice essential to Egyptian cosmology. The notion that dust held sin had practical implications. Sweeping and cleansing rituals were vital not just for hygiene but for spiritual purification. Priests and household members alike undertook careful ceremonies to remove dust, symbolically washing away the accumulated moral and spiritual impurities that could disturb harmony. Ancient texts warned that dust disturbed carelessly could unleash harmful forces. Wind-blown dust from cursed sites or neglected tombs was believed to carry malevolent energies, spreading spiritual contamination. Thus, the management of dust was a sacred responsibility, entwined with the well-being of individuals and communities. The relationship between dust and sin also played a role in funerary practices. Tomb builders took great care to seal burial chambers, preventing the intrusion of dust, which might corrupt the soul's journey. Dust invading the tomb could symbolize the intrusion of chaos into the ordered realm of the dead, threatening eternal rest. Symbolically, dust was connected to the concept of decay and mortality. The human body, once living flesh, returned to dust upon death, completing the cycle of life. This cyclical view embraced the dust as both origin and destination, linking sin and redemption in a perpetual cosmic dance. Mythological stories speak of dust as the residue of divine battles or celestial punishments, where gods cast down enemies whose sins were scattered like grains across the earth. These myths reinforced the power of dust as a container of cosmic memory and justice. The physical accumulation of dust in sacred spaces was often interpreted as a sign of neglect or spiritual decline. Temples left in ruin, shrines abandoned, and statues forgotten under layers of dust symbolized a loss of divine favor and societal decay. Conversely, ritual cleansing of dust was an act of renewal, restoring sacred spaces to their proper state. Such ceremonies involved water, incense, and prayers, re-establishing the connection between the divine and the earthly realm by purging the dust that held impurity and sin. Dust's presence was also linked to secrecy and concealment. Hidden sins and forbidden knowledge were metaphorically buried beneath layers of dust, accessible only to those daring enough to uncover them. This association made dust a symbol of both danger and revelation. The figure of the dust storm features prominently In Egyptian literature, as a force that can both cleanse and destroy, storms could sweep away sins and corruption, but also wreak havoc, reminding people of the fragile balance between order and chaos. In homes, the accumulation of dust was a constant challenge, with family members using brooms fashioned from palm fibers or rushes to cleanse living spaces daily. This mundane task carried spiritual weight, emphasizing the connection between cleanliness and moral purity. The concept extended to social behavior as well. Sins committed in secret were thought to settle like dust upon one's conscience, invisible but ever present. Confession and atonement rituals aimed to remove this spiritual dust, restoring balance within the individual and community. Priests played a crucial role in managing the spiritual implications of dust. Through daily temple rituals, they purified altars and sacred objects, removing dust to maintain divine presence. Their actions underscored the belief that dust could interfere with communication between gods and mortals. The Egyptians also linked dust to agricultural cycles. Dust storms and the fertile silt deposited by the Nile's floods symbolized destruction and renewal, echoing the themes of sin, death, and rebirth. This duality reinforced dust's complex symbolic significance. Pharaohs were sometimes described as sweeping away the dust of chaos from the land, a metaphor for restoring order and punishing sin. Their role as guarantors of Mat involved rituals that symbolically cleansed the kingdom of corruption, emphasizing dust's connection to moral and political renewal. The arts reflected these beliefs, with visual motifs depicting dust swirling around figures representing sin or chaos. Tomb paintings and reliefs often showed symbolic cleansing scenes where dust and dirt were banished to maintain spiritual purity. Dust's intimate connection to mortality was central to Egyptian funerary texts, where the deceased's successful journey depended on avoiding the corruption that dust represented. The Book of the Dead contains spells designed to protect the soul from the impurity of dust and decay, the fear that dust held. Sin also fostered societal values of accountability, knowing that no misdeed was truly hidden, encouraged individuals to uphold ethical behavior, aligning personal conduct with the cosmic order. Yet dust also represented potential redemption. Through ritual purification, sin-laden dust could be removed, allowing for forgiveness and restoration. This hopeful aspect balanced the more ominous connotations, reflecting a worldview where order could be regained. Archaeological sites bear witness to these beliefs, with layers of dust providing records of human activity and neglect. The stratification of dust offers insights into periods of prosperity and decline, metaphorically paralleling the waxing and waning of societal morality. In conclusion, the dust holds every sin, encapsulates an ancient Egyptian understanding of the physical and spiritual world as intertwined realms where even the smallest grain could carry profound meaning. Dust, mundane and omnipresent, was a vessel of memory, morality, and cosmic justice, a silent testament to the human struggle between order and chaos, purity and transgression.